Chapter 16 of The Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 16. A bitter wind was sweeping the commercial road, Whitechapel, as the two detectives, each well muffled up, descended from their cab and walked briskly eastwards. Save for a slouching wayfarer or two, shambling unsteadily along, and little groups gathered about the all-night coffee stalls, the roads were deserted. Neither man had attempted any disguise. It was not necessary now. As they turned into Grave Street, they automatically walked in the centre of the roadway. There were some places where it is not healthy to walk at night on shadowed pavements. They moved without haste and without loitering, as men who know exactly what they have to do. From one of the darkened houses a woman's shrill scream issued, full of rage and terror. It was followed by a man's loud, angry tones, the thud of blows, shrieks, curses, and brutal laughter. Then the silence dropped over everything again. The two men had apparently paid no heed. Even had they been inclined to play the part of knights-errant in what was not an uncommon episode in Grave Street, they knew that the woman who had been chastised would probably have been the first to turn on them. There was a side entrance to 404A, which was the newspaper shop that Foyle had cause to remember. He struck the grimy panel sharply with his fist and waited. There was no reply. Again he knocked, and Green, unbuttoning his greatcoat, flung it off and laid it across his arm. He could drop it easily in case of an emergency. Still there was no answer to the knock. "Luckily I swore out a search warrant," muttered Foyle, and searched in his own pockets for something. It was a jemmy of finely tempered steel, gracefully curved at one end. He inserted it in a crevice of the door and, leaning his weight upon it, obtained an irresistible leverage. There was a slight crack and it swung inwards as the screws of the hasp drew. The two men stepped within and, closing the door, stood absolutely still for a matter of 10 minutes. Not a sound betrayed that their burglarious entry had alarmed anyone. Presently Green made a movement, and a vivid shaft of light from a pocket electric lamp played along the narrow uncarpeted passage. The superintendent gripped his jemmy tightly and turned towards the dirty stairs. Then the light vanished as quickly as it had flared up, and from above there came a sound of shuffling footsteps. Even Heldon Foyle, whom no one would have accused of nervousness, felt his heart beat a trifle more quickly. He knew that if he were as near the heart of the mystery as he believed, any second might see shooting. Penned as he and his companion were in the narrow space of the passage barely 3 feet wide, a shot fired from above could scarcely miss. Crouching low, he sprang up the narrow staircase in 3 bounds, making scarcely a sound. On the landing above he wound his arms tightly about the person whose movements he had heard, and whispered a quick, tense command. "Not a word, or it will be the worse for you. Let's have a light, Green." The prisoner kept very still, and Green flashed a light on his face. It was that of a man of 40 or so, with pronounced Hebrew features. His greasy black hair was tangled in coarse curls, and a smooth black moustache ran across his upper lip. A pair of shifty eyes were fixed fearfully on Foyle, and the man murmured something in a guttural tongue. "We are police officers. How many people are there in this house?" demanded Foyle sternly, in a low voice. "You may as well answer in English. Quietly now." He had released his hold around the Jew's waist, but stood with the jimmy dangling by his side, and with ears cocked ready for any sound. Green had climbed the stairs and stood by his side. Domiciliary visits are unfrequent in England, but the Jew was not certain enough to stand upon a legal technicality. As a matter of fact, the search warrant would have met the difficulty. He cringed before the two men, whose faces he could not see, for Green had thrown his wedge of light so that it showed up the man's sallow face and left all else in darkness. "I do not know why you have come," he answered, forming each word precisely. "I have done nothing wrong. I am an honest newsagent. There is only my wife, daughter, son, lodger in house." "You are a receiver of stolen goods," answered Foyle, something, it must be confessed, at a venture. "Don't trouble to deny it, Mr. Israels. We're not after you this time, not if you treat us fairly. What about this lodger of yours? Have you bought him a typewriter lately?" "Yes, yes, I help you all I can," protested the Jew, with an eagerness that deceived neither of the detectives. There is no class of liar so abysmal as the East End criminal Jew. They will hold to a glib falsehood with a temerity that nothing can shake. If there is no necessity to lie, they lie for practice, it is to be presumed. The best way to extract a truth is to make a direct assertion by the light of apparent knowledge, and so sometimes obtain assent. Foyle knew the idiosyncrasies of the breed, hence the threat in his demand. "I bought a typewriter, yes," went on Israels. "I think he was honest. Didn't seem as though police after him." "Which room is he in?" Israels jerked a thumb upwards. "Next landing, door on left," he ejaculated nervously. The superintendent pushed by the man. He knew that the critical moment had come. With his quick judgment of men he had summed up Mr. Israels. Whatever the Jew's morals, it was evident that he had a wholesome respect for his own oily skin. He would not risk himself to save the neck of another man. Foyle's intentions were simple. He would steal quietly up the second flight of stairs, burst the door open if it were locked, and seize the man he was in search of in his sleep. But his plans were frustrated. He had not taken 2 steps when a woman peeped from an adjoining room. He caught one glimpse of her in the semi-darkness with a police whistle at her lips. He sprang forward, and as he did so a shrill, ear-piercing blast rang out. Green was close behind him. She shrieked as the detective tore the whistle from her, and he felt her slender figure entwine itself about him. Down he went with his companion on top of him, and another woman's loud, hysterical cries added to the pandemonium. Foyle picked himself up and, lifting the girl bodily, flung her without ceremony into the room from which she had emerged. From above a voice shouted something, and a knife whizzed downstairs and struck quivering in the bare boards of the landing, grazing Green's shoulders. All need for caution was gone now. Foyle had dropped his jemmy, and his hand closed over his pistol. Only as a last resource would he use it, but if he had to, well, there could be no harm in having it handy. A door slammed as the 2 detectives climbed the second flight of stairs. Green flung himself against the one that had been indicated by Israels, and the flimsy fastening gave way under the shock of his 13 stone. There was no one in the room. Savagely, Heldon Foyle turned and caught the handle of a second door. It turned, and they entered the room, empty like the first, but with an open window looking out on a series of low roofs a dozen feet below. And over the roofs a shadowy figure of a man was clambering hurriedly. He could only dimly be seen. Green clambered through onto the window-sill and dropped. He was unlucky. A projecting piece of wood caught his foot, and he staggered and lost time. Before he had recovered himself, the fugitive was out of sight, and the sound of his progress had ceased. Foyle called to him to come back, and, without waiting to see whether his orders were obeyed, made his way back again to the first-floor landing. Israels was still there, very white and shaky, as the superintendent struck a match. "Where's that girl?" said the detective curtly, "the one who gave the alarm." "My daughter. She thought you were burglars. She didn't know." "Where is she?" Without waiting for a reply, he entered the room whence she had emerged, and, striking another match, applied it to a gas bracket. A fat woman was sitting up in bed looking at him timorously. He paid no heed to her, but stooped to look under the bed. When he straightened himself, Green had rejoined him. "The girl gave us away," exclaimed Foyle. "Here, you, where is she gone?" He shook the woman roughly by the shoulder. "Go to the bottom of the stairs, Green, and see that no one slips in or out. Take that chap outside down with you." "My daughter!" exclaimed the woman helplessly. "She has gone to stay with her aunt. We are respectable people. You frightened her. We don't like the police coming here." "Highly respectable," repeated Foyle under his breath. Aloud he said menacingly, "We shall soon know whether you are respectable. Where does the girl's aunt live?" 22 Shadwell Lane, was the reply, glib and prompt. Foyle looked for an instant penetratingly at her. Her eyes dropped. His hand went to his pocket, and he calmly lit a cigar. Then he went downstairs to where Green was on guard and politely apologized to Israels. Casually he repeated the question he had put to the woman. Yes, the Jew had seen his daughter go out. She said she was going to her aunt. Her aunt lived at 48 Sussex Street. "I see," said the superintendent quietly. "The fact is, of course, that she is not your daughter, and that she has not gone to her aunt's. You are in an awkward corner, my man," he went on, changing his tone and moving a step nearer. "Better tell us the truth. Your wife has let me know something." As if mechanically, he was dangling a pair of shiny steel handcuffs in his fingers. Handcuffs seldom formed a part of his equipment, but tonight he had carried them with him on the off chance that he might have to use them. The Jew shrank away, but the sight had proved effective. "I'll tell all the truth," he whined, with an outspreading gesture of his hands. "I've done no wrong. You can't hurt me. She came here a day or two ago and paid £5 for a week's lodging. I was to tell anyone who inquired that she was my daughter. She slept with my wife. What harm was there? I am poor. £5 isn't picked up like that every day. The man came afterwards. He said he was a journalist and asked me to buy him a typewriting machine. I asked no questions. Why should I?" His manner was that of a much injured man. Foyle cut him short now and again as he rambled on with a question. In half an hour he felt that he had extracted a fair amount of truth, mingled though it was with cunning lies. He guessed now that the woman whom he had vaguely seen was she whose part in the mystery of the house in Grosvenor Gardens had always been shadowy and vague. She could be none other than Lola Rochelle, little Lola of Vienna, otherwise the Princess Petrovska. End of chapter 16. Of the Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 17. There was nothing more to be done at Grave Street. Heldon Foyle remained in the house while Green walked to the chief divisional station, and in an hour or two the divisional inspector with a couple of men arrived. Then Foyle saw to a strict search of the house from top to bottom. Nothing there was that seemed to possess any great importance as bearing on the case. The man who had fled over the roof had used a single room, apparently as bed and sitting room, so it was to this place that the detectives devoted chief attention. "He must have been sleeping in his clothes," grumbled Green. "He hadn't time to dress. There's the typewriter the note was written on." He sat down before a rickety table and, inserting a piece of paper in the machine, slowly tapped out the alphabet, and after a brief inspection passed the paper on to the superintendent, who scanned it casually and was about to throw it away when something gripped his attention. "This looks queer," he muttered, and held the paper up slantingly away from the gas jet in order to examine it by what photographers call transmitted light. His brows were drawn together tightly. The sheet of paper which Green had used was an ordinary piece of writing paper. On its rough surface Foyle had noted a slight sheen, unusual enough to attract his attention. Even he would not have noticed it but for the angle in which he had happened first to look at it when he took it from Green. It might be an accidental fault in the manufacture of the paper, yet trivial as it seemed, it was unusual, and one of the chief assets in detective work is not to let the unusual go unexplained. "It's the same typewriter, there can be no question of that," said Green. "You can see that the B is knocked about and the O is out of line." "That's all right," said Foyle. "I wasn't thinking of that. It looks to me as if there's some sympathetic writing on this." He held the paper so that the heat from the gas jet warmed it. Every moment he expected that the heat would bring something to light on the paper. He gave a petulant exclamation as nothing happened, and his eyes roved over the table whence Green had taken the paper. He believed that he was not mistaken, that there was something written which could be brought to light if he knew how. He knew that there were chemicals that could be used for secret communications which could only be revealed by the use of other chemicals, a process something akin to development in photography. It was unlikely, if the user of the room had used some chemical agent, that he would have thought of destroying and concealing it. But there was nothing on the table that suggested itself to Foyle as having been used in the connection. Keenly he scrutinised the room, his well-manicured hand caressing his chin. "Ah!" he exclaimed at last. He had noted a small bottle of gum arabic standing on the cast-iron mantelpiece. Now, gum arabic can be used for a variety of purposes, and it has the merit of invisible ink of being made decipherable by quite a simple process which minimises the risk of accidental disclosure. The superintendent held the paper to the gas again for a few minutes. Then, from a corner of the room, he collected a handful of dust, no difficult process, for it was long since the place had felt the purifying influence of a broom, and rubbed it hard on the rough surface of the paper. A jumble of letters stood out greyly on the surface. He looked at them hard, and Green, peeping over his shoulder, frowned. "Cipher!" he exclaimed. It was undoubtedly cipher, but whether a simple or abstruse one, Foyle was in no position to judge. He had an elementary knowledge of the subject, but he had no intention of attempting to solve it by himself. There were always experts to whom appeal could be made. A successful detective, like a successful journalist, is a man who knows the value of specialists, who knows where to go for the information he wants. That meaningless jumble of letters could only be juggled into sense by an expert. Foyle nevertheless scrutinised them closely, more as a matter of habit than of reading anything from them. They were UJQW, stop. BJNT, stop. FJ, stop. UJM, stop. FJTV, stop. UIYIQL, stop. SK, stop. DQU, QZO, KKEY, JPK, stop. ANUJ, stop. M, stop. Q, stop. NG, stop. N, stop. AYUQNQIX, stop. IGZ, stop. ANUJ, stop. SIO, stop. IGZ, stop. SMPPN, stop. RT, stop. 12845 space HGZ VFSF, stop. "We'll let Jones have a go at that," he said. "Anything else now?" Someone handed him the knife that had been thrown at him on the landing and a curious leather sheath that had been picked up near the bed. From the bottom of the sheath depended a leather tassel. Foyle looked it over and failed to discover any manufacturer's name. He slipped the weapon into his pocket with the mental reflection that it looked Greek. The search went on from attic to cellar, and profuse notes were taken of everything found with its exact position. The elaborate trouble taken by these men to describe minutely in writing every little thing would have seemed absurd to anyone not versed in the ways of the Criminal Investigation Department. Yet nothing was done that was not necessary. An error of an inch in a measurement might make all the difference when the case came on for trial. Foyle and Green left the house in charge of the divisional man. Already a description had been circulated of the man they had failed to surprise, but as neither had caught more than a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the darkness, they had had to rely on the descriptions given by Israels and his wife. And even if that estimable pair had really tried honestly to give a fair description of the man, which the detectives thought was extremely doubtful, there could be little hope that it was accurate. If the average man tries to describe the appearance of his most intimate friend and then asks a stranger to identify him, he will realize how misleading such descriptions may be even at the best of times. Yet the Criminal Investigation Department had to work with such material as they had. Heldon Foyle was very silent as they trudged side by side out of Whitechapel into the silent city streets, for there are no taxicabs to be found in the East End at such hours. The case was developing, but though he was beginning to have a hazy glimpse into some of its workings, there was much that remained a mystery to him. His questionings of Israels had satisfied him that the man who had escaped was neither Grell nor Ivan. He could not blame himself for not effecting an arrest. Looking back over the night's events, he could not see that he could have taken further precaution. If he had taken more men, the escape would have occurred just the same over the roofs, for he would still have felt it his duty to question Israels. He could not have foreseen that the ready-witted Lola was there, nor that she should have so ingeniously given the alarm. The luck had been against him. Nevertheless, he had gained an important fact. Lola was in London, and was obviously acting in concert with Grell. It was easier to look for two persons than one. Sooner or later he would lay hands on them and solve the mystery of the murder. He clenched his fists resolutely as his thoughts carried him away. Meanwhile there was the cipher. If that could be decoded, it might be valuable. Green's voice broke in upon his thoughts. "We didn't find anything bearing on Waverley." "Waverley?" repeated Foyle. "Oh, yes, I had almost forgotten him." For an hour after they had reached Scotland Yard, the superintendent laboured at his desk, collecting reports and writing fresh chapters in the book which held all the facts in relation to the crime, so far as he knew them. He slipped the result of his labours at last in an envelope and left them over to be dealt with by the inspector in charge of the registry, which is a department that serves as official memory to Scotland Yard. "That is all right," he said, and stretched himself. Someone knocked at the door. The handle turned, and an erect man with his right arm carried in a black silk handkerchief, improvised into a sling, entered the room. It was Detective Inspector Waverley. End of chapter 17. Of the Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 18. Heldon Foyle was on his feet in a second, and he pushed a chair towards his subordinate. Detective Inspector Waverley sat down and drummed nervously on his knees with the fingers of his left hand. "Well, you've got back," said the superintendent in a non-committal tone. "We were beginning to wonder what had happened to you. I hope that arm of yours is not badly hurt. What has been the trouble?" The inspector winced and sat bolt upright in his chair. "I guess I was to blame, sir," he said. "I fell into a trap like a new-joined cabbage boy. This man, Ivan Abramovitch, must have known that he was followed by a couple of us, so he threw off Taylor, who was with me, very simply, by going into a big outfitter's place in the city. I dodged round to a second entrance, and sure enough, he came out there. I couldn't get word to Taylor, so I picked him up, and a pretty dance he led me through a maze of alleys up the side of Petticoat Lane and round about by the Whitechapel Road. You all know the sort of neighbourhood it is there. Well, I suppose I must have got a bit careless, for in taking a narrow twist in one of those alleys, someone dropped on me from behind. I hit out and yelled, but I didn't get a second chance, for my head was bumped hard down on the pavement, and I went to sleep for good and plenty. There were a couple of men in it, for I could hear 'em talking before I became properly unconscious. They dragged me along, linking their arms in mine, and we got into a cab. I guess the driver thought I was drunk, and that they were my pals helping me home. When I came round, my head was bandaged up, and I was in quite a decent little room, lying on a couch with Mr. Ivan Abramovitch sitting opposite to me. I couldn't give a guess where it was, for the window only looked out on a blank wall. I sat up, and he grinned at me. "I am a police officer," I said. "How did I get here?" "I brought you," he says with a grin. "You were taking too great an interest in my doings for my liking. Now I am going to take an interest in yours." At that I jumped for him and got a knife through my arm for my pains. After he'd sworn at me like a trooper in English, French and Russian for about 10 minutes, he bandaged up the cut with his handkerchief and told me if I made any more fuss I was in for trouble. Someone knocked at the door, but he ordered them off. "You won't get away from here alive without permission if I can help it," he said. "But if you do, you won't be able to identify anyone but myself. If you take it coolly, there'll be no harm come to you." I tried to bluff a bit, but he just laughed, and then I stayed with him in the same room up to within an hour or two ago, when someone came into the house and he was summoned outside the door. They had an excited powwow, and I could hear a woman talking. Finally the man came back and told me they'd determined to let me go. He put a handkerchief over my eyes, and after a while I was taken down into what I thought was a taxicab. I was turned out a quarter of an hour ago at the Blackfriars end of the Embankment." Foyle was by now striding up and down the office, his hands thrust deep in his trousers pockets. He paused long enough to blow down a speaking tube and put a quick question. What was the number of the cab? It had no police number. Its index mark was AA 4796. The superintendent drew from his pocket a little black book, such as is carried by every police officer in London. On the outside was inscribed in white letters, "Metropolitan Police Pocket Directory." He turned over the pages until he found what he wanted. A messenger had pushed open the door. "Southampton registration," said the superintendent. "Johns, get through on the phone to the Southampton police and ask them to trace the owner of this car the moment the county council offices open." The messenger disappeared and he turned on Waverley. "The number's probably a false one. A board slipped over the real number, as they did in the Dalston case, when some American toughs went through that jeweller a month or two back. We might as well look into it, though. These people are wily customers, or they wouldn't have kept you from seeing the rest of the gang. They tried to frighten us by threatening to make away with you. I think it likely that they found it rather a nuisance to look after you, especially when Green and I tumbled onto some of their people an hour ago. You haven't exactly covered yourself with glory, Waverley, but under the circumstances I shall take no disciplinary action. Now go and write out a full report, and then go home. The police surgeon will recommend what leave of absence you want to get over the stab in the arm. Good night, or rather good morning." "Thank you, sir. Good morning, sir." Foyle never forgot discipline, which is as necessary, or more necessary within limits, in a detective service as in any other specialised business. To have sympathised with Waverley would have been bad policy. He had been made to feel that he had blundered in some way, and the feeling with which he had entered the room, that he was a martyr to duty, had vanished in the conviction that he was simply a fool. Foyle lit a cigar and fell into a reverie that lasted perhaps 10 minutes. He was glad that Waverley was safe, but a little disgusted that he had failed to baffle the precautions taken while he was a prisoner, and so have learnt something that might have been of value in the investigations. Presently he lifted the telephone receiver and ordered a taxicab from the all-night rank in Trafalgar Square. In a little while he was being whirled homeward. Not till midday next day did he arrive at the Yard. A slip of paper was lying on his desk, the record of a telephone message from the Southampton police. It read: "Halford, Chief Constable, Southampton, to Foyle, C.I.D., London. Car number AA 4796 belongs to Mr. J. Price, The Grange, Lyndhurst. Mr. Price is an old resident in the neighbourhood and a man of means. The car is a 6-cylinder Napier." "As I thought," commented Heldon Foyle thoughtfully, tearing the paper into little bits and dropping them into the wastepaper basket. The number was a false one. They knew that Waverley would have a look at the number. Oh, these people are cunning, cunning. Green found him half an hour later, hard at work with the collection of typewritten sheets which formed the book of the case. Foyle was still juggling with his jigsaw puzzle, trying to fit fresh facts in their proper position to old facts. "Well?" asked the superintendent abruptly. Green read from a paper in his hand. "Taylor, who is watching the Duke of Burghley's house in Berkeley Square, has just telephoned that a woman who corresponds to the description of Lola Rochelle has just been admitted and is still there." Into Foyle's alert eyes there shot a gleam of interest. "You don't say so," he muttered, and then more alertly, "Is he still on the telephone? If so, tell him to detain her should she come out before I can get down. He must be as courteous as possible. We mustn't lose her now. And send a man down at once to bring Wills, the butler at Grosvenor Gardens, here. He's the only man who saw the veiled woman enter the house on the night of the murder." End of chapter 18. Of The Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 19. From behind the curtains of the sitting-room, Eileen Meredith could see two men occasionally pass and repass the house. They did not go by often, but she knew that even if she could not see them, they always held the house in view. They were not journalists, they were more sedate, older men, nor did they molest anyone who entered or left the house. They merely exercised a quiet, unwearying, unobtrusive surveillance, and Eileen knew that Heldon Foyle had taken his own way of preventing her from seeing Sir Ralph Fairfield. She felt certain that were she to leave the house, the men would follow her. She did not guess, however, that Foyle had intended them to give her an opportunity of discovering their presence. She would be the more unlikely to persist in her rash resolve if she knew it would be frustrated. Nor did she know that Fairfield was equally closely watched in all his comings and goings. The hysterical outbreak that had been provoked by the superintendent's penetration of her doings when she had visited his office at Scotland Yard had been followed by hours of almost complete collapse. To her father, enough had been told to make him hurriedly summon a specialist. The doctor explained. "I have known similar cases follow a great shock. She is mentally unbalanced on one point. Unless anything occurs to excite her in connection with that, time will effect a cure. She must not be opposed in her wishes, and I would suggest that she be taken out of London and an effort made to distract her. Plenty of society, outdoor amusements, anything to occupy her mind." "I suggested that we should leave London," said Lord Burghley gloomily. "She refuses." "Then don't press her. Ask her friends to visit her, and don't let her leave the house except with a competent attendant." So it was that Eileen found herself practically a prisoner in her own home. She received the visitors invited by her father at first with a mechanical courtesy, but later on with an assumption of cheerfulness that deceived her father and even to more extent the doctor. She had begun to realize that she would never shake off the vigilance which surrounded her until she had convinced folk that she had regained her normal spirits. Her capabilities as an actress, which had won for her leading parts in many amateur plays, had never been taxed so hardly. But then she had invariably been cast for comedy. Now she felt she was playing tragedy. For night and day she never forgot. Always there was one thought hammering at her brain. She withdrew into the room as a neat little motor brougham halted at the door. In a little while Mrs. Porter Strangeways was announced. Reluctantly, Eileen condescended to welcome the portly, middle-aged dame who was tacitly recognized as being the leader of American society in London. The girl smiled brightly as the woman rose to greet her with both arms outstretched. "It is so good of you, dear Mrs. Porter Strangeways," she exclaimed. "I have only my friends to look forward to now." Mrs. Porter Strangeways indicated her companion by some subtle means of her own. "You poor girl," she exclaimed, throwing just the right reflection of sympathy into her not unmusical voice. "I called before, but you were unfit to see anyone then. I took the liberty of bringing a friend to see you, the Princess Petrovska." The name conveyed nothing to Eileen. She knew not how the woman she faced was concerned in the tangle in which she herself was involved. She saw only a slim, beautifully dressed woman whose age might have been somewhere between 30 and 40, and who still laid claim to a gypsy-like beauty. The dark eyes of the princess dwelt upon the girl with a sort of well-bred curiosity. Mrs. Porter Strangeways imparted information in a swift whisper. "A Russian title, I believe. Met her in Rome 2 years ago. She is a delightful woman, so bright and happy, though I believe, poor dear, she had a terrible time before her husband died. She called on me yesterday and asked me to bring her to see you. She's so interested in you. You don't mind?" The quick thought that she was being made a show of caused a spasm to flicker across Eileen's face. Almost instantly she regained her composure, and for half an hour Mrs. Porter Strangeways prattled on. The other took little part in the conversation. Eileen could feel that the princess was watching her closely under her cast-down eyelashes. The woman repelled and yet fascinated her. When the time came for leave-taking, she found herself giving a pressing invitation to the other to call again. With a smile of satisfaction, the princess promised. They had not been gone a quarter of an hour when the princess was announced alone. Eileen, a little astonished, received her questioningly. "I had to see you alone," explained the older woman. "I have something of importance to say to you. That's why I made Mrs. Porter Strangeways bring me. I feared that you would not see me otherwise." "To see me alone?" repeated Eileen, with the air of one completely mystified. Then, as the other nodded grimly, she closed the door of the room. With a murmured "Pardon me," the princess walked across the room and turned the key. "It will be better so," she said. "What I have to say must not be overheard. The life of someone may depend on secrecy." Eileen had begun to wonder if her strange visitor were mad. There was something, however, in her quiet, methodical manner that forbade the assumption. The Princess Petrovska had settled herself gracefully in a great armchair. "No, I am not mad," she answered the unspoken question. "I am quite in my senses, I assure you. I have come to you with a message from one you think dead, from Robert Grell." The room reeled before Eileen's eyes. She clutched the mantelpiece with one hand to steady herself. "From one I think dead," she repeated. "Bob is dead." She gripped the other woman fiercely by the shoulder and almost shook her in the intensity of her emotion. "He is dead, I tell you. What do you mean? I know he is dead. Do not lie to me. He is dead." The Princess Petrovska glanced gravely up into the strained features of the girl. Her own face was a mask. "Calm yourself, Lady Eileen," she said. "You have been made the victim of a wicked deceit. He is not dead, but a man wonderfully like him is. I have come here at his request to relieve your mind." She dropped her voice to a whisper. "At the same time, he is in grave danger, and you can help him." The girl's hands dropped to her side, and she regarded her visitor helplessly. A new hope was beginning to steal into her heart, but her reason was all on the other side. "He is dead," she protested faintly. "Fairfield killed him. Why should he hide if he is not dead? Why should he not come here himself? Why should he send you?" "Don't be a fool," retorted the other impatiently, and the impertinence of the words had the effect intended of bracing the half-fainting girl. "He does not come because to do so would be madness. Because if he showed himself he would be at once arrested by Scotland Yard detectives. They believe him to be the murderer of his double, a man named Goldenburg. There is a note he gave me for you." The letters danced before Eileen's eyes as she tore open the thin envelope and held what was undoubtedly Robert Grell's writing in her shaking hand. She was startled as never before in her life, save when she heard of the murder. Slowly she read, the words biting into her brain. "Dearest, forgive me for not letting you know before that I am safe. I had no means of communicating with you with safety. The man who is dead was killed by no wish of mine, yet I dared not run the risk of arrest. The bearer of this is an old friend of mine who will herself be in peril by delivering this. Trust her and destroy this. She will tell you how to keep in touch with me." There was no signature. Mechanically, Eileen tore the letter in two and dropped the fragments on the blazing fire. She felt the dark eyes of the Princess upon her as she did so. A spasm of jealousy swept across her at the thought that this woman should have been trusted, should have had the privilege of helping Grell rather than herself. She strove to push it aside as unworthy. He was alive. He was alive. The thought was dominant in her mind. She could have sung for very joy. "Well?" asked the Princess. "I don't understand," said Eileen wearily. "He does not explain. There is nothing clear in the note but that he is alive." "He dare say no more. That is, he's succeeded in evading the police so far. If by any chance that letter had fallen into their hands, it would have told them no more than they knew at present." "Where is he?" demanded Eileen. "I must go to him." "No, that will never do. You would be followed. I will give any message for you. You can help, but not in that way. He is in need of money. Have you any of your own? Can you let him have, say, £500 at once?" The girl reflected a moment. "There is my jewellery," she said at last. "He, or you, can raise more than 500 on that. Wait a moment." She left the room, and a smile flitted across the grave face of the Princess. A few moments later she returned with a little silver casket in her hands. "And now," she said, "tell me what happened. Who killed this man Goldenburg?" The Princess Petrovska gave a dainty little shrug. "Mr. Grell shall tell you that in his own fashion," she said. "Listen." For 10 minutes she talked rapidly, now and again writing something on a slip of paper and showing it to Eileen. The girl nodded in comprehension, occasionally interjecting a question. At last the Princess rose. "You fully understand?" she said. "I fully understand," echoed Eileen. End of chapter 19. Of the Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 20. Heldon Foyle had been prepared to take any risk rather than allow the Princess Petrovska to escape him again. There was nothing against her but suspicion. It was for him to find evidence that might link her with the crime. It is in such things that the detective of actuality differs from the detective of fiction. The detective of fiction acts on moral certainties which would get the detective of real life into bad trouble. To arrest the Princess was out of the question. Even to detain her might make matters awkward. Yet the superintendent had made up his mind to afford Wills, the butler, a sight of her at all costs. If Wills identified her, it would be at least another link in the chain of evidence that was being forged. He carried the butler in a taxicab with him to the nearest corner to the Duke of Burghley's house. A well-groomed man sauntered up to them and shook hands warmly with Foyle. "She has not come out yet," he said. "Good," exclaimed Foyle. "Come on, Wills. You have a good look at this woman when she does come out, and stoop down and tie your shoelace if she's anything like the woman who visited Robert Grell on the night of the murder. Be careful now. Don't make any mistakes. If you identify her, you'll probably have to swear to her in court." "But I never saw her face," complained Wills helplessly. "I told you I was not certain I'd know her again." He was palpably nervous and unwilling to play the prominent part that had been assigned to him. Foyle laughed reassuringly. "Never mind. You have a look at her, old chap. You never know in these cases. You may remember her when you see her. Everyone walks differently, and you may spot her by that. It won't do any harm if you don't succeed." He led Wills to a spot a few paces away from the house, but out of view of anyone looking from the windows, and gave him instructions to remain where he was. He himself returned to the corner where Taylor, the detective inspector who had greeted them when they drove up, was waiting. The other end of that side of the square was guarded by one of Taylor's assistants. Lola was trapped, if Foyle wished her to be trapped. He beckoned to a uniformed constable who was pacing the other side of the road. The man nodded. Detectives, whatever their rank, are never saluted, and took up his position a few paces away. They had not long to wait. A taxicab whizzed up to the house, evidently summoned by telephone. Wills was staring as though fascinated at the slim, erect figure of the woman outlined on the steps of the house. He half stooped, then straightened himself up again. The superintendent muttered an oath under his breath and nodded to the loitering policeman. The constable immediately sprang into the roadway with arm outstretched, and the cab, which was just gathering way, was pulled up with a jerk. The blue uniform is more useful in some cases than the inconspicuous mufti of the C.I.D. "Get hold of Wills and bring him after us to Malchester Row Police Station," and opening the door, he stepped within as the driver dropped in the clutch. The Princess had half risen and gave a little cry of dismay at the intrusion. With grim, set face, the detective adjusted his tall form to the limits of the cab and sat down beside her. His hand encircled her wrist and he forced her back to the seat. "I shouldn't try to open the door if I were you," he said quietly. "You might fall out." The woman dropped back and did some quick thinking. She had no difficulty in guessing who Foyle was, and she could scarcely have failed to see the staring figure of the butler as she left the Duke of Burghley's house. She fenced for time, doing the astonished, outraged, half-frightened innocent to perfection. "What does this mean? How dare you molest me? Where are you taking me?" The detective smiled easily as he answered in the formal words of C.I.D. custom. "I am a police officer, perhaps I needn't tell you that, and I am taking you to Malchester Row Police Station." "To arrest me? You would dare? Do you know I am the Princess Petrovska? There is some mistake. I shall appeal to the Russian ambassador. What do you say I have done? I am a friend of Lady Eileen Meredith, the daughter of the Duke of Burghley. She will tell you I have only just left her. You are confusing me with someone else." It was admirably done. The mixture of indignation and haughtiness might have imposed upon some people, and the threat of appeal to the Russian ambassador had been very adroit. Heldon Foyle merely nodded. "This is not arrest," he replied. "It is not even detention, unless you force me to it. I am inviting you to accompany me to give an account of your movements on the night that Harry Goldenburg was murdered. I will call your bluff, Lola, and we will call at the ambassador's if you like." She made a gesture with one hand, as of a fencer acknowledging a hit, and turning her head, smiled sweetly into his face. Nevertheless, in spite of everything, she felt a little nervous. She had gone to see Eileen with her eyes not fully open to the risk she ran. Deftly used, newspapers have their uses. In supplying the story of the murder to the pressmen, Foyle had omitted all mention of the finding of the miniature. The woman had not known that Scotland Yard had a portrait of her, and had deemed it unlikely that she would be recognised by the watchers of the house. Although she had lived by her wits in many quarters of the world, she had hitherto avoided trouble with the police in England. She wondered how much Foyle knew. It was evidently of no use trying to impress him with the importance of her rank and connections. Princesses are cheap in Russia. "You are Mr. Heldon Foyle, of course," she said. "I have heard that you are very clever. I don't see what I can have had to do with the murder, even if I am Lola Rachel, which I admit." "We shall see. Can you prove where you were between 10 o'clock, when you left the Palatial Hotel, and midnight on that date?" She laughed merrily. "You are not so clever as I thought," she exclaimed. "Do you think that I am a murderess? I went straight to an hotel near Charing Cross, the Splendid, and caught the 9 o'clock boat train to Paris. It is easily proved." Foyle shifted to the seat opposite so that he could see her face more easily. "Then you don't deny that you visited Grosvenor Gardens that night, that you were admitted by Ivan Abramovitch, Grell's valet, and taken to his study?" "Of course I do," she retorted laughingly. "If that's all you've got to go upon, you may as well let me go now." "Very well, we shall see," he answered. The cab stopped at Malchester Row Police Station. End of chapter 20. Of the Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 21. To the constable who opened the cab door, Foyle gave quick instructions in a low voice. The Princess Petrovska found herself ushered into a plainly furnished waiting room, decorated with half a dozen photographic enlargements of the portraits of high police officials and a photogravure of Her Majesty the Baby. There the policeman left her. Foyle came to her a moment later. His couple of questions to the cabman as he paid him had not been fruitful. He had been ordered by the lady to drive to Waterloo Station. It was a fairly obvious ruse, which would have had the effect of effectually confusing her trail, for from there she might have taken train, tube, omnibus, tram, or cab again to about any point in London. "I am sorry," he apologised. "We shall have to keep you here for an hour or two while your statements are verified." "I don't mind," she countered lightly. "It will be an amusing experience. I have never seen a police station before. Perhaps you would like to show me over while we're waiting, Mr. Foyle." The superintendent was admiring her confidence a little ruefully. A pleasant-faced, buxom woman tapped at the door, and Lola eyed her with misgivings. Foyle's blue eyes were fixed on her face. "I am afraid I must deny myself that pleasure," he said suavely. "There are other matters which will take up our time. First, I shall be obliged if you will let the matron here search you." The nonchalance of the Princess Petrovska had disappeared in a flash, and Foyle noted her quick change of countenance. She had recollected she was carrying Lady Eileen Meredith's jewels. They would inevitably be found if she were searched. She was not so much worried by what explanation she could give as to what would be the result of a questioning of Eileen. Angrily defiant, she was on her feet in a flash. "You have no right to search me. I am not under arrest," she declared. Foyle knew she was right. What he was doing was flagrantly unlawful unless he charged her with some offence. Yet there are times when it is necessary for a police officer to put a blind eye to the telescope and to do technically illegal things in order that justice may not be defeated. This, he felt, was one of the occasions. He ignored her protestations and left the room, closing the door after him. For a brief moment the woman forgot the breeding of the Princess Petrovska in the fiery passion of Lola the dancer. But if she meditated resistance, a second's reflection convinced her that it would be futile. The matron, for all her good-tempered face, was well developed muscularly, and did not seem the kind of woman to be trifled with. The Princess submitted with as good a grace as she could muster. As the woman drew forth the casket of jewels, Lola made one false move. She laid a slim-gloved hand on her arm. "If you want to earn £10, you will give me that back," she said softly. The matron shook her head with so resolute an expression that the word 20, which trembled on the Princess Petrovska's lips, was never uttered. Gathering in her hands the articles she had found, she stepped outside. In 3 minutes her place was taken by Foyle. He quietly returned to her everything but the jewel case. This he held between his fingers. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. His voice was keyed to the stern, official tone he knew so well how to assume. She gripped the side of a chair tightly. "What is that to do with you? It is mine. Give it to me." "Not unless you can prove it is yours. If you do not, I shall charge you with being in possession of property suspected to be stolen." She bit her lips until the blood came. Her face had become very pale. If the threat were meant seriously, and she could see no reason why it should not be, she was in an awkward predicament. Ordinarily she had ready resource, a fertile genius for invention. Now her wits seemed to have deserted her. Cudgel her brains as she would, she could see no way out of the difficulty. To boldly state that the jewels had been entrusted to her by Eileen would involve opening up a fresh line of inquiry for the C.I.D. men that might have disastrous results. Nor was there any person who might bear out a story invented on the spur of the moment. "Well?" he spoke coldly. "I refuse to tell you where I got them," she retorted. "You must do as you like." "Then it is my duty to warn you that anything you say may be used in evidence against you. You will be charged." He opened the door and cried down the corridor, "Reserve!" To the constable who answered he indicated the Princess by a nod. "Take this woman to the detention room. She will be paraded for identification in half an hour." The detention room of a London police station is a compromise between the comparative luxury of a waiting room and the harshness of a cell. Like a waiting room, it is furnished with chairs and tables, and like a cell, its door is provided with a strong, self-acting lock. The Princess Petrovska gritted her teeth viciously as she was left alone, and paid no heed to the magazines and papers left on the table, a consideration for visitors that had not been discernible in the waiting room. Meanwhile, Foyle had set every available man of the divisional detachment of the C.I.D. busily at work. A couple had been sent to verify the account given by the woman of her movements on the night when the murder occurred. The remainder had been sent to bring in a score of women, the wives and daughters of inspectors and other senior officers. Detective Inspector Taylor had turned up with Wills, who was informed of the part he had to play. "You say you couldn't recognise the woman who came out of Lord Burleigh's house. Now we're going to give you another try. We don't want you to pick anyone out unless you're absolutely sure. Mind that." Some of the women who had been fetched in by the detectives were rejected by Foyle as being too unlike the Princess. He intended the identification test to be as fair as possible. The 10 who finally took their places in the high-pitched charge room were as nearly like the Princess in build and dress as could be managed from the choice afforded. They stood in a row on the opposite side of the room from the steel-railed dock and the high desk. Then Lola was brought in. Her head was held high and her lips curled superciliously as she took in the arrangements. "Please choose a position among these ladies," said Foyle urbanely. "You may stand anywhere you like." There was an angry glitter in her dark eyes as she obeyed. She was not the sort of woman to risk a scene uselessly. Then Wills was brought in. Foyle put a formal question to him. "Have you seen any of these ladies before? Don't be in a hurry to answer. Walk down the line and take a good look at each." Wills slowly carried out his instructions. As he reached the last woman he shook his head. Lola's eyes caught those of Foyle with a glance of malicious triumph, but the superintendent was not done yet. "Walk round the room, if you please, ladies, from left to right. No, a little quicker. Now, Wills, see if you can recognise any of them by their walk." 3 times they made the circuit of the room, while the butler darted nervous glances from one to the other. "It's no good, sir," he confessed at last. "I don't know any of 'em." To Foyle, the result was not unexpected. He had adopted the expedient as a forlorn chance of linking up the Princess with the crime. Now it had failed, he intended to try other measures. He dismissed Wills and the women with a nod of caution not to speak of the formality they had witnessed, and at a nod from him a uniformed inspector stood up by the high desk, pen in hand. "Do you charge this woman, Mr. Foyle?" he asked. Taylor had ranged up against her, and almost unconsciously she found herself standing by the desk facing the officer. She searched the superintendent's inflexible face to see if it gave any sign of relenting. Foyle was calm, inscrutable, businesslike. That was what had struck her from the moment she entered the police station, the cool, businesslike fashion in which these men had dealt with the situation. There were no histrionics. They might have been clerks engaged in some monotonous work for all the emotion they evinced. They treated her as impersonally as though she was a bale of goods about which there was some dispute. She was not a person easily daunted, but the atmosphere chilled her. She reflected quickly that her refusal to explain the possession of the jewels was playing into Heldon Foyle's hands. He would guess that they were Eileen Meredith's. In any case, she could not stop him from seeing and questioning the girl. What advantage would it be to be placed under lock and key? Before the superintendent could reply, she had made up her mind. "One moment. I can explain how I got the jewels if I can see Mr. Foyle alone." The inspector looked hesitatingly at the superintendent, who was stroking his chin with his hand. Foyle murmured an assent and led the way back to the detention room. The woman swung round to him quickly once they were alone. "Those jewels were entrusted to me for a particular purpose by Lady Eileen Meredith," she said peremptorily. "That is all you have any right to know. You can easily ring her up and ask her. Do it at once and let me go." "Very well," he said imperturbably. "I shall keep you here until I have done so." But it was not to Berkeley Square that he telephoned from the privacy of the divisional C.I.D. offices. It was to Scotland Yard. Within 5 minutes Chief Inspector Green was setting out from the great red brick building to see, first, the Duke of Burghley, and secondly, Lady Eileen Meredith. A full hour passed away, and Foyle received the result of the inquiries into Petrovska's movements. Her alibi was complete. In every particular her story of her movements had proved right. Green, arriving at the police station with an agitated and puzzled nobleman and his solicitor, saw his chief for a few moments alone. "She admits having handed over the jewels to Lola, but she won't say a word beyond that," he said. "She's as obstinate as a mule. I have told the Duke something of where we stand, and he has agreed to take the gems back without letting her know. It was a tough job, but I got him to see at last that the girl might be implicating herself. He says he's never heard of Petrovska." Foyle rubbed his chin vigorously. "I'll have a talk with the old boy. See if you can get the public carriage office to borrow us a taxicab and get Poole to drive it slowly up and down this street. If she hails it when she goes out, well and good. If not, Bolt and you had better follow her, and the cab will come after you so that you can use it in emergency." Green had done his work with the Duke and the lawyer with tact. Foyle found his interview with them confined to evading questions that he had no wish to answer. He dismissed them at last with the jewels in the custody of the man of the law. Then he went straight to his prisoner. "You can go," he said abruptly. "I shall ask you to be very careful, however, Princess. If you are wise, you will leave England at once." "Why?" she asked, opening her blue eyes wide and gazing at him with blank astonishment. His voice became silky. "Because, my dear lady," he said, "I feel that your career in England may not be altogether without reproach. I shall try to find out a little more about it, and if I get a chance, I warn you frankly, I shall have you taken into custody. You are too mischievous to be allowed to run around loose." Her red lips parted in a scornful smile. "Oh, you make me tired," she retorted. "Good-bye, Mr. Foyle." "Pardon me," he said, and thrusting a couple of fingers into his waistcoat pocket, fished out a piece of paper. "Do you know this writing?" She handed the piece of paper back to him with a shake of the head. "No, I never saw it before," she retorted, and passed out. But Heldon Foyle had her fingerprints. End of chapter 21. (22) of the Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 22. Sir Hilary Thornton lifted his coat-tails to the cheerful blaze as he stood with his back to the fireplace. Heldon Foyle, with the book which he was giving his nights and days to compiling on the desk in front of him, sat bolt upright in his chair talking swiftly. He was giving an account of the progress of the investigation. Now and again he ran a well-manicured finger down the typewritten index and turned the pages over quickly to refer to a statement, a plan, or a photograph. Or he would lift one of the speaking tubes behind his desk and send for some man who had been charged with some inquiry to question him on his report. "These youngsters are all the same," he complained querulously. "They will put flowers into their reports. It is always a beast of a job to make 'em understand that we want a fact, plain and prompt. They can do it all right in the witness box, but when they get a pen in their hand they fancy they're budding Shakespeares. The old hands know better." He passed from this outburst to particulars of what had happened. The Assistant Commissioner listened gravely, now and again interpolating a question or a suggestion. Foyle rapidly ran over the case, emphasizing his points with a tap of his finger on the pile of papers. "We're progressing a little, though not so fast as I'd like. We know that Grell is alive, that he is in touch with Ivan Abramovich and Lola Rochelle, or the Princess Petrovska, as she calls herself. There is at least one other man in it, probably more. It's fairly certain that Grell knows who killed Harry Goldenberg, even if he didn't do it himself. Goldenberg was apparently dressed in Grell's clothes before he was killed. It is clear now that the clothes were his own, with Grell's belongings put in the pockets. A Mexican dagger was used. That may be or may not be of importance. Grell has travelled in Mexico. We have eliminated Ivan and Sir Ralph Fairfield as the actual murderers, nor do the Princess Petrovska's fingerprints agree. I had Bolt take the fingerprints of all the servants in the house, so that we are sure that none of them actually committed the crime. All this narrows the investigation. If we find Grell, we are in a fair way to finding the author of the murder." Sir Hilary Thornton stroked his moustache doubtfully. "That's all very well, Foyle, but Mr. Grell is hardly the sort of man to commit murder. I gather that your suspicions point to him. Besides, where is the motive?" "Every man is the sort of man to commit murder," retorted the superintendent quickly. "You can't class assassins. All murders must be looked upon as problems in psychology. Mind you, I don't say that Grell did have a hand in this murder. I am merely summing up the cold facts. Why should he disappear? Why should he mix himself up with the shady crew he is with, people who have twice tried to murder me, and who knocked out and kidnapped Waverley? If we find him, we shall find the murderer. That's why I wanted the description of Goldenberg sent out. It makes work. I've got 2 men out of town now working on statements made at Plymouth and Nottingham, which I feel sure will have no result. But it gives us a sporting chance to nail him if he tries to leave the country. Another line we're looking after is money. He's failed with Fairfield. Lola had a try with Lady Eileen Meredith, who handed over her jewels. We stepped in, bagged 'em, and gave 'em back to the Duke of Burghley. All this means he'll have to make some desperate try for cash soon." "In fact, it's check," commented Sir Hilary, who was something of a chess player. "Now you're manoeuvring for checkmate." "Precisely," said Foyle. "I've been trying, too, to get hold of something about Goldenberg. Neither we nor the American police have yet been able to connect him up with Grell. We're still trying, though. Sooner or later we shall get hold of something. And there's Lola. If we could have got Wills to identify her as the veiled woman, we should have had a very good excuse for arresting her in spite of her alibi. She's the sort of woman who would prepare an alibi. We've not got any proof that she knew Goldenberg. That's our great difficulty now, to link up the various persons and find out how they've been associated with each other before. There's one thing, sir. I've managed to get the inquest adjourned for a month, so we shan't have to make any premature disclosures in evidence. The newspapers are still hanging about. They got wind that something was happening at Malchester Row, and there were a dozen or more men waiting for me when I came out. I told them that we'd been trying to identify a woman and had failed. They'd have known that anyway. They promised to be discreet. They're good chaps. It isn't like the old days. There was one man, Winters his name was, who came up to the yard to see me once. He was told I was at Vine Street. He went down there and was told I hadn't been there. Here's a piece of luck, he says to himself, and went back to his office. There he wrote up a couple of columns telling how the whole of the C.I.D. had lost trace of me. I came out of Bow Street, where I'd been giving evidence in a case, to see a big contents bill staring me in the face. Famous detective vanishes. Before I could buy a paper, another newspaper chap comes along. He stared at me as if I was a ghost. "Hello," he says. "Don't you know you're lost? Every pressman in London is looking for you." "Am I?" says I. "How?" Then it all came out. Since then I've been very careful in dealing with newspaper men. Sir Hilary laughed and nodded. "Is there anything more?" he asked. "Yes." Foyle had grown grave once more. "I handed over the cipher that we found at Grave Street to Jones to see if he could make anything out of it. He's an expert at these kind of puzzles. Well, he's just reported that the thing is simple as it stands, though in other circumstances it might be difficult. The translation runs: 'This will be the best method of communicating with E.M. if L supplies her with key. Her phone number 12845 Gerard.'" End of chapter 22. Of the Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 23. Unless a case is elucidated within a day or two of the commission of an offence, the first hot pursuit resolves itself into a dogged, wearisome, but untiring watchfulness on the part of the C.I.D. A case is never abandoned while there remains a chance, however slight, of running a criminal to earth. And even when the detectives, like hounds baffled at a scent, are called off, there remains the gambler's element of luck. Even if the man who had original charge of the case should be dead when some new element reopens an inquiry, the result of his work is always available, stored away in the registry at Scotland Yard. There are statements, reports, conclusions, the case complete up to the moment he left it. The precaution is a useful one. A deathbed confession may implicate confederates, accomplices may quarrel, a jealous woman may give information. There have been unsolved mysteries, but no man may say when a crime is unsolvable. Heldon Foyle had many avenues of information when it was a matter of ordinary professional crime. The old catchword "honour among thieves" was one he had little reason to believe in. There was always a trickle of information into headquarters by subterranean ways. The commonplaces of crime were effectively looked after. Murders are the exception in criminal investigation work, and while other crimes may be dealt with by certain predetermined if elastic rules, homicide had to be considered differently. Yet Foyle had cause to think that there might be little harm in setting to work the underground agencies which at first sight seemed to have little enough in common with the mystery of the rich Robert Grell. These spies and informers would try to cheat and trick him. Some of them might succeed. It would cost money, but money that might not be wasted. 4 of the 5 chief detective inspectors who form the general staff of the C.I.D. were in the room, among them Wagnell, who had passed a quarter of a century in the East End and knew the lower grades of crooks thoroughly, collectively and individually. Foyle shut the door. "I wish some of you would pass the word among our people that we will pay pretty handsomely for anyone who puts us onto the gang mixed up in this Grell business. Word it differently to that. You'll know how to put it. You might get hold of Sheeny Foster, Wagnell, or Poodle Murphy, or Buck Taylor. They may be able to nose out something." "Buck was sent up for 6 months for jumping on his wife," said Wagnell. "I haven't seen Sheeny lately, but I'll try to get hold of him, and I'll have the word passed along." So, having made the first step in enlisting a new and formidable force of guerrillas on the side of the law, Foyle went back to his office to revolve the problem in his brain once more. His thoughts wandered to Sir Ralph Fairfield. Here was a man whose services would be invaluable if he could be persuaded to help. Grell knew him, trusted him. Foyle was a man who never neglected the remotest chances. He deemed it worth trying. True, so far as their encounters were concerned, Fairfield had not been encouraging. He would probably need delicate handling. Foyle wrote a note, scrutinised it rapidly, and going out, gave it to a clerk to be sent at once by special messenger. "Mr. Heldon Foyle presents his compliments to Sir Ralph Fairfield, and would be obliged if he could see him at his office at 6 o'clock this evening, or failing that, by an early appointment, on a matter of urgent importance." That was all it said. Foyle never wasted a word. At 5 minutes past 6 that evening Sir Ralph Fairfield was announced. He ignored the offer of a chair which was made by the superintendent, and stood with stony face a few paces from the door. Foyle was too wise to offer his hand. He knew it would not be accepted. He nodded affably. "Good evening, Sir Ralph. I was hoping you would come. I would not have troubled you but that I felt you would like to know how we are getting on. You are a friend of Mr. Grell's." "Well," said Sir Ralph frigidly, "I am here, Mr. Foyle. Will you let me know what you want to say and have done with it?" His manner was entirely antagonistic. There was still a lingering fear of arrest in his mind, but his attitude was in the main caused by the fact that he believed he had been suspected by the other. The superintendent partly guessed what was passing in his mind. "I want your word first, Sir Ralph, that what I tell you shall not be spoken of by you to any living soul," he said. "Then I will tell you frankly and openly the whole history of our investigation, and you can decide whether you will help us or not. No, wait a moment. I know how loyal a friend you were of Robert Grell's, and it's in the light of that I am going to trust you. He is not dead. He is in hiding. It is for you to say whether you will help us to find him. If he is innocent, he has nothing to fear." He was watching the other closely while he sprung the fact that Grell was alive upon him. He wanted to know whether it was really a surprise, whether in spite of the vigilance of the C.I.D. men, Grell or his companions had managed to communicate with Fairfield. The baronet had opened his mouth to speak. A flicker of colour came and went in his pale cheeks, and he fingered his stick nervously. Then his jaw set, and he strode to where the superintendent was sitting and clutched him tightly by the arm. "What's all this?" he demanded hoarsely. "Do you mean to say Grell is not dead?" "As far as I know, he is as alive as you or I at this present minute," said Foyle. "If you want to hear about it all, give me your word and sit down. You're hurting my arm." "I beg your pardon," said the baronet mechanically, and stepping back, seated himself in a big armchair that flanked the desk. He passed his hand in a dazed fashion across his forehead, and his composure came back to him. Staggering, incredible as the statement seemed, there was that in Foyle's quiet tones that gave it the stamp of truth. "Of course I'll give you my word," he said. Foyle was satisfied that the baronet knew nothing. There was a deeper policy behind the pledge he had exacted than that of preventing a leakage of confidence. Fairfield would not go behind his word. In that the superintendent had judged him accurately. But the pledge would also tie his hands should Grell or his companions eventually manage to communicate with him. Even if he decided not to help the police, he would find it difficult, without going behind his word, to assist the missing explorer. From the beginning he traced the trend of the investigation, Fairfield leaning forward and listening attentively, his lips tight pressed. As Foyle brought out the points, the baronet now and again jerked his head in understanding. The detective slurred nothing, not even the accusation and resolve of the Lady Eileen Meredith. The baronet choked a little. "You think she really meant to kill me?" He waved his hand impatiently as Foyle nodded. "Never mind that. Go on, go on." Foyle finished his recapitulation. Sir Ralph's eyes were fixed on a Vanity Fair cartoon of the Commissioner of Police hanging framed on the wall. He was trying to readjust his thoughts. From a man who believed himself under deadly suspicion, he had suddenly become a confidant of Scotland Yard. He had been released of all fear for himself. And Bob Grell was alive after all. That, he reflected, was the queer thing. What did it mean? Where was the reason for this extraordinary tangle of complications? Grell always was deep, but so far as his friend knew, he was a man strictly honourable. How had he come to be involved in an affair that looked so black against him? There was Eileen to be considered too. In spite of himself, he could readily believe the story of the pistol. She had believed him guilty of the murder. Her mood when last he saw her had been that of a woman who would stoop to anything to compass her vengeance. But she knew he was not guilty now. That might make a difference to his course of action. Should he throw in his lot with Foyle and assist in bringing Grell within the reach of the law? "What do you say, Sir Ralph? Will you help us?" Foyle's suave voice broke in upon the thread of his thoughts. He shook himself a little and met the detective's steady gaze. "If I do, will it mean that you will arrest Grell for murder?" The superintendent caressed his chin and hesitated a little before replying. "I have been quite open with you, Sir Ralph. I don't know. As things are at present, it looks uncommonly as though he had a hand in it. He is the only person who can clear himself. While he remains in hiding, everything looks black against him. We have managed to keep things quiet until the resumption of the inquest. When that takes place, we shall not be able to maintain the confusion of identity. With things as they stand, the jury are practically certain to return a verdict of murder against him. If he is not guilty, his best chance is for us to find him. Understand me, Sir Ralph. If he is innocent, you are doing him no service by refraining from helping us. Every day makes things blacker. If he is guilty, well, it is for you to judge whether you will shield a murderer even if he is your friend." To another person, Foyle would have used another method of persuasion, talking more but saying less. He had staked much on his estimate of the baronet's character, and awaited his reply with an anxiety of which his face gave no trace. Very rare were the occasions on which he had told so much of an unfinished investigation to another person, and that person not an official of Scotland Yard. Often he had feigned to open his heart with the same object, to win confidence by apparent confidence. The difference now was that he had given the facts without concealment or suppression. Fairfield fingered his watch chain, and the big office clock loudly ticked 5 minutes away. "I will assist you as far as I can, but you must allow me to decide when to remain neutral," he said at last. "Agreed," said Foyle, and the two shook hands on the bargain. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of the Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 24. Dutch Fred changed his seat to one less conspicuous and further up the tramcar. He felt that his luck was dead out, that life was a blank. And that Heldon Foyle of all men should have chosen that particular moment to board that particular tramcar had, as Fred would have expressed it, absolutely put the lid on. Fred knew very well how to circumvent the precaution taken by order of the police that public vehicles should have the back of the seats filled in to prevent pocket-picking. Instead of sitting behind a victim, one sat by his side, with a stall behind to pass the plunder to. A dip of class, and Dutch Fred was an acknowledged master, never keeps his plunder on him for a single second longer than necessary. But with Foyle on the car it was too expensive to operate, especially single-handed. Therefore Fred felt the world a dreary place. He had boarded the car alone, and without thought of plunder. Had it been in professional hours, he would have had at least one stall, perhaps two, with him. As chance would have it, a portly business man with a massive gold chain spanning his ample waist had seated himself next to the operator, and Fred had decided that the watch on the end of the cable was worth risking an experiment upon. Besides, the appearance of prosperity of the mug spoke of a possible leather stuffed with banknotes. Decidedly, even in the absence of a stall, it was worth chancing. And then Foyle got on and spoilt it all. If anyone on the tramcar lost anything, he would know who to blame. For Heldon Foyle had spoiled one of the greatest coups that ever a crook had been on the verge of bringing off. Fred, immaculately clad and with irreproachable references, had approached Greenfield's, the Bond Street jewellers, with a formula for manufacturing gold. He had discovered the philosopher's stone. "Of course, I don't want you to go into this until I've proved that it can actually be done," he said airily. "See there, I made that handful of gold dust myself. You test it and see that it's all right. Now I'll sell you the secret of making that for £100,000. I don't want the money till I've given you a demonstration." So an arrangement was fixed up. The jewellers, with a faith that long experience had not destroyed, believed in Fred. Nevertheless, they took the precaution of calling in Foyle, then unknown to Fred save by name. In a little room in Clerkenwell the experiment took place. With ingenious candour, Fred prepared a crucible in front of his select audience after the various ingredients had been submitted to strict examination. Then he placed it on the fire and stirred the contents occasionally. At last the process was finished, and at the bottom of the crucible was found a teaspoonful of undoubted gold dust. Then, while Fred, with a broad smile of satisfaction, awaited comment, the detective, who had noted the strange fact that he had kept his gloves on while stirring the crucible, stepped up to him and deftly whipped one off. In the fingers were traces of gold dust, enough to convict Fred and get him 3 years at the Old Bailey. Out of the corner of his eyes Fred watched the detective presently stand up and pass along the deck of the car towards him. The operator's face was bland, and he smiled with the consciousness of one who has nothing to hide as the superintendent sat down beside him. "Hello, Mr. Foyle. I'm glad to see you," he said, with a heartiness that he knew did not deceive the other. "It's a long time since we met." The detective returned the greeting with a cheerfulness that was entirely unassumed. "It's a piece of luck meeting you, Freddie," he went on. "But there, I always was lucky. You're just the man in the wide world I've been wanting to see." "What's on?" growled Freddie, with quick suspicion. "Oh, you're all right," the detective reassured him. "I want you to help me. Let's get off at the next stopping place and have a drink." His fears allayed, Freddie followed the detective off the car. They were professional enemies, it was true, but as a rule their relations were amicable. It was policy on both sides. In the saloon bar of an adjacent public house Freddie unburdened himself fully and frankly while he sipped the mixed vermouth. "I'm glad you struck me, on my word I am," he said earnestly, while his active wits were wondering what the detective wanted. "That bloke was carrying a red clock, and though I was going for it, I had a feeling I should get into trouble. If you'd been a minute or two later, you'd—" "Why talk of these unpleasant things, Freddie?" said Foyle, with a deprecatory wave of the hand. "You know how I'd hate to have to do anything to disturb your peace of mind." He drew him to a secluded corner of the lounge. "Come over here. Now listen. Do you know Goldenberg or any of his pals?" Freddie started a little and looked meditatively at the tips of his well-polished boots. "The chap that did in Grell. I knew him a bit," he said cautiously. "He was in a different line, you know. Mostly works alone, too. I can't say that I know much about him. There's Charlie Eden. He was in with him once. I guess he's in town. And Red Ike. He knew him, too. Perhaps there's some more of the boys who had some does with him. But he always was a bit above us common crooks. I only went for big game once." His gaze lingered on Foyle's ring. "And then it didn't come off." "Never mind about Eden. You keep your eyes skinned for Red Ike or anyone else that knew Harry, and give me the office. It'll be worth your while. You can come to me if you're hard up. Have a shot at blank and blank and blank." He named several public houses which are known rendezvous for crooks of all classes. "You see what you can pick up, and if ever you're in trouble you'll know the wife and kid will be looked after." Freddie grinned cynically to hide a real appreciation. He knew that Foyle would do as he said. And in the criminal profession, however big the makings, there is very rarely anything like thrift. For a man who at any time might find himself doing 5 years, it was something to know that those left outside were in no danger of the workhouse. For even crooks have human instincts at times. "That's all right, Mr. Foyle," said Freddie. "What you say goes. Who will I ask for if you're not at your office?" "You can talk to Mr. Green." "Righto." Freddie swung out into the dusk, whistling, for he had an assignment with his stalls outside one of the big theatres. Foyle waited a few moments to let him get clear, and himself stepped into the street. To the surprise and disgust of the rest of the mob, Freddie early relinquished the evening's expedition, although his deft fingers had captured no more than a silver watch, hung deceptively on a gold chain which he had left hanging, a woman's purse containing 15 shillings in silver, and a pocket-book inside which were half a dozen letters. It was a poor hand, and Mickey O'Brady, who was one of the stalls, frankly expressed his disgust. "What's the use of chucking it at this time of night? It ain't 9 o'clock yet. There's the lifts at the Tube that we haven't worked for weeks. Struth, what did you want to fetch us out for at all? The stuff you've got won't buy drinks." Freddie's lower jaw jutted out dangerously. He was a small man, but he had a hair-trigger temper. He always made a point to be unquestioned boss of his gang. Discipline had to be maintained at all costs. "See here, Mickey," he said tensely. "I've had enough tonight, and I'm going to give it a rest. So you'd better shut your face. I'm the man who's got the say, so here. You just bite on that." Mickey, an Irish cockney who had never been nearer Ireland than a professional visit to the Isle of Man, clenched his fists with an oath. He was a recent ally and had not fully learned his position in Freddie's scheme of things. In just 2 minutes he was sitting gasping on the pavement, trying to regain his wits after a tremendous punch in the solar plexus, while his fellow stall was explaining to a constable that it was all an accident, and Freddie had quietly melted away in the direction of the tube station. The pickpocket never strained his luck, wherein he differed from the lower grade professors of his art. Common sense and superstition were both factors in his decision to suspend operations. He might as well spend his time, he decided, in trying to carry out Foyle's instructions. His intention took him to 3 public houses as far apart as Islington, Blackfriars, and Whitechapel. At the latter place, in an ornate saloon bristling with gilt and glittering with mirrors, he found the man he wanted. Leaning across the bar, exchanging sallies with a giggling barmaid, was a lean, sallow-complexioned man whose rusty, reddish-brown hair was sufficient justification for his nickname. "Hello, Ike," said the newcomer, adjusting himself to a high stool. "How's things?" "Hello, Dutch. Thought you got stuck the other side of the town. What are you going to have?" Over the drinks they talked for a little on a variety of subjects, the weather, politics, trade, while the barmaid remained within hearing. Both were craftsmen in their particular line, and they spoke as equal to equal. Ike had made a specialty of getting cheque signatures for a little clique of clever forgers, and had his own ways of getting rid of his confederates' ingenuity. Nor was he above working sidelines if they promised profit, and in that respect, at least, he resembled Dutch Fred. His abilities in many directions had been recognized by Harry Goldenberg. It was not till they had gone over to a little table in a remote corner that Dutch Fred broached Goldenberg's name, in a tentative reference to the murder in Grosvenor Gardens. "Funny thing you should speak about that," commented Ike, glancing casually about to make certain that no one was within earshot. "I hear that there's piles of stuff in that house, and there's only a butler and a man named Lomont, who was Grell's secretary, living there now to look after things. It would be easy to do a bust there." Fred's pulses jumped a little faster as he toyed with his glass. He knew something of Red Ike's methods, and felt certain that some proposal was coming. He could see the gratitude of Foyle taking some tangible form if he were able to bring this off. He had no scruples. Even if Ike suspected treachery after the event, well, he could look after himself. "I don't know," he said, shaking his head doubtfully. "It isn't like a lonely suburban street." Ike grinned. "I'm not a mug, am I? What do you say to walking in the front door, opening it with a key, and with the keys of the rest of the house in my sky? All I want is a straight man to keep doggo." "Criminy, have you got the twirls?" he gasped. "Where did you get 'em?" "Never mind where they came from. I've got 'em. That's enough. More than that, I've got a layout of the house all marked out on paper, with every bit of stuff marked out where it ought to be. It's as easy as falling off a log." "Am I in it?" demanded Freddie. "Why should I be telling you if you wasn't? You keep doggo outside if you like." More drinks were ordered, and Freddie came to business. "What do I get?" Ike let his chin rest meditatively on his slim fingers. "Let's see. I cut in for a third, and I shall do all the work. I'll give you a quarter of that third. You won't have anything to do except give me the office if anything goes wrong." "'Struth!" Freddie was more hurt than indignant. "You aren't going to Jew me down like that. Who else is in it?" "Never mind who else is in it. I give you first chance as a pal. You can take it or leave it." "Right, I'm on," agreed Freddie. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of the Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 25. The compact between Heldon Foyle and Sir Ralph Fairfield had begun to bear fruit. For 3 days an advertisement had appeared in the personal column of the Daily Wire. "Will R.G. communicate with R.F. Very anxious." Much thought had gone to the wording of the line. If Grell or any of his companions noticed it, Foyle felt certain that in some way or other an attempt would be made to get in touch with the baronet. He was fairly confident that the missing man needed money. He would probably not question how Fairfield knew that he was alive. If he rose to the bait there would be a catch of some sort. Whether Grell was the murderer or not, he held the key to the heart of the mystery. The superintendent emphasized this in a talk with Fairfield. "It's a fair ruse. We're pretty certain he's hiding somewhere in London, and it's a big field unless we've got a starting point. That's our trouble, finding a starting point. In detective stories the hero always hits on it unerringly at once. There was one yarn in which the scratches on the back of a watch gave the clue to the temperament and history of its possessor. Now that watch might have been borrowed, or bought second-hand, or lost and restored at some time, and the marks made by anyone but its owner. That kind of subtlety is all right in print, but in real life it would put you on a false track in 19 out of 20 cases. In 90 cases out of 100, the obvious solution is the right one. In an investigation, there may be coincidences of circumstantial evidence pointing in the wrong direction. But when you get first one coincidence, then a second, a third, and a fourth, you can be fairly sure you're on the right track. You don't add proof together, you multiply it. See here." He drew a piece of paper towards him and rapidly scribbled upon it. 1 coincidence equals 0. 2 coincidences equals 2. 3 coincidences equals 6. 4 coincidences equals 24. 5 coincidences equals 120. That's the kind of thing in terms of arithmetic. Now look at the parts in relation to each other. Grell leaves the club and gets you to lie about his absence. Coincidence number 1. A man astonishingly like him is murdered in his study a short time afterwards. Coincidence number 2. He is apparently dressed in Grell's clothes and has Grell's belongings in his pocket. Coincidence number 3. Both Grell and his valet, Ivan Abramovich, disappear. Coincidence number 4. Ivan is found with the pearl necklace on him. Coincidence number 5. Grell writes you a note which I stole from you. Coincidence number 6. You follow me? I could go on with other proofs. Grell must know who committed this murder, and if we get hold of him, we shall know. "I see the point," confessed Fairfield. "All the same, I don't believe, even if he knows, as you say, that he had a hand in it. This may be the 100th case, you know, and there may be some satisfactory explanation of his actions." "I quite agree. Even cumulative proof may be destroyed. I can guess what you are half thinking. You believe that I fastened my suspicions on Grell and that I'm determined to go through with it, right or wrong. That's a common mistake people fall into in regard to police functions. In fact, it doesn't matter a bit to a police official whether he gets a conviction or not, unless, of course, he neglects an important piece of proof through gross carelessness. All he has to do is to solve a problem and to place his answer before a magistrate, and then a judge and jury to decide whether he's right or wrong. No one but a fool would attempt to bolster up a wrong answer. In this case, too, you must remember that there are fingerprints. They cannot lie. If we get the right man, Grell or anyone else, there will be no question of doubt." Fairfield tapped a cigarette on the back of his left hand and rose. "Well, even if you do draw Grell with that advertisement, I doubt if you'll get anything from him if he doesn't want to talk. I know the man, and he's hard to beat out of any decision that he makes up his mind to. As hard," he bowed smilingly to the detective, "as you would be." "Thank you. If it were a question of Grell against Foyle, I might have to go under. But it isn't. Behind me is the C.I.D., behind that the whole force, behind that the Home Secretary, and behind him the State. So you see, the odds are on my side." A jerky buzz at the telephone behind the superintendent's desk interrupted any reply that Fairfield might have made. With a muttered good day, the baronet moved across the carpeted floor out of the room. As he closed the door, Foyle put the receiver to his ear. "Hello? Hello? Yes, this is Foyle speaking." "Oh, yes, I know." "No, you'd better not tell me over the telephone. You can't come here. Somebody who knows you might see you." "Is it important?" "All right. You'd better come to Lyon's Tea Place in the Strand, the one nearest Trafalgar Square. I'll get Mr. Green to go along and have a talk with you. Good-bye." Rubbing his hands together thoughtfully, the superintendent sent for Green. In a few moments the big figure of the chief inspector loomed in the doorway. "Dutch Fred thinks he's got hold of something," opened Foyle abruptly. "I've told him to meet you at Lyon's in the Strand. I think he's all right, but don't let him have any money until you've tested his yarn." "Very good, sir," said Green. "I'll look into it." As he left, Foyle bent over his desk and, with the concentration that was one of his distinguishing traits, busied himself in a series of reports on a coining raid in Kensington, sent up to him by those concerned for his perusal. He had a theory that the efficiency of the battalion of detectives under him was not lessened by making his men tell him exactly how they were performing their work, both verbally and in writing. "You may have brains, you may have intuition, you may have courage, but you'll never make a good detective without system," he sometimes told young officers when they joined the staff of the C.I.D. There were things, of course, that could not be put in writing, but Foyle never invited his subordinates to act against the law. Such things have to be done at a man's own discretion without official sanction. It was less than an hour when the chief inspector returned, portentously grave. "Well?" demanded Foyle. "The real goods," said Green, who was obviously feeling pleased with himself. "Your long shot has come off. They're falling short of money, for they've put Red Ike up to break into Grell's house and steal all the stuff in sight. Ike has asked Fred to give him a hand." A low whistle came from Foyle's lips. Why hadn't he thought of this? Discreetly done, with the help of a confederate, and apparently Grell had no lack of confederates, it would get over the money difficulty quite simply. "Sit down, Green. Let's hear all about it," he said, diving into his pocket for the inevitable cigar. "It's all fixed up. Ike walks into the place with Grell's keys at 8 o'clock tonight, while Freddie keeps watch outside. And someone keeps an eye on Freddie, if I'm any judge. Go on, who put Ike up to it?" "He won't say. He's as tight as a drum about all that, according to Freddie. When we arrest him, we must get something out of him." "I don't know," said Foyle slowly. "Ike's a queer bird. Dutch Fred will need to look after himself if ever he knows who gave the game away. Well, now, let's fix up things. Is anyone keeping an eye on the place for Ike?" "Freddie's supposed to be there." "And I guess that they've found out that Lomont and Wills will be out of the house tonight. You might find out for sure, Green. Phone Lomont, but don't stop 'em if they've made arrangements. It would simplify matters if we could get one or two of our own men in the house. We daren't do that, though." "Why not, if Freddie's keeping watch?" "That's all right. It isn't Freddie I'm afraid of. There'll be someone else there. The people who put this game up are not going to trust a couple of crooks entirely. I think I'll take a stroll out that way myself about 7 o'clock. We'd better have the place surrounded. I'll send for a section map of that part." A clerk brought the map, and Foyle's fingers described a wide, irregular circle, now and again halting at one spot where he wished a man to be placed. "That ought to do," said the superintendent when Green had finished taking a note of the various points. "Pick out some good men, though I don't suppose they will have much to do. It's only a measure of precaution. You'd better be on hand yourself about 7:30. If all goes well, we shall get bigger game than Ike." End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of the Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 26. Within the invisible cordon that Foyle had drawn about Grell's house in Grosvenor Gardens, Dutch Fred loitered, his keen ferret eyes wandering alertly over passers-by. Misgivings had assailed him during a vigil that had lasted several hours. It was all very well to be "in with the police," but suppose their plans miscarried? Suppose Red Ike and his unknown friends got to know that the double cross was being put on them? Fred fingered a heavy knuckle-duster in his pocket nervously. Man to man, he was not afraid of Ike, but there were his friends. The tall, straight figure of Heldon Foyle, with coat-collar turned high up, had passed him once without sign of recognition and vanished in the enveloping shadow of the slight fog that confused the night. Yet though the superintendent had apparently paid no heed, he was entirely alert, and he had not failed to observe Freddie. What he wanted was to see who else was in the street. He returned by a detour to a hotel in the Buckingham Palace Road, outside which a big motor car was at rest, with a fairly complete mental picture of 3 people who might be possible spies among those he had passed. The thickening fog was both an advantage and a disadvantage to the detectives. An advantage because it would force any person watching on behalf of Grell and his associates to keep within a reasonable distance of the house if Ike was not to be lost sight of, and a disadvantage because it would afford increased facilities for anyone to slip away. To Green, seated in the motor car, Foyle commented on this fact. "You'll have to have your breakdown rather closer to the house than we thought," he said. "Give Ike a good chance inside. You've got the duplicate key all right?" "That's safe enough," answered Green, tapping his pocket. "If I don't see you after we've bagged him, I'd better charge him with housebreaking, I suppose." "Certainly. Now get along. It's 7:45. The car moved silently forward and took the corner of Grosvenor Gardens. 30 paces beyond the spot where Dutch Freddy was lighting a cigarette it came to a stop, while the chauffeur, dropping to the ground, rummaged fiercely with the interior. Green leaned back in the shadow, his eyes fixed on the steps leading to Grell's house. There was a sufficient air of plausibility about the whole accident to impress anyone but the most suspicious. Heldon Foyle had entered the hotel, for he did not care to run the risk of frightening his quarry by showing himself again until it was necessary. But he kept a vigilant eye on the clock. Promptly, as the hands touched 10 minutes past 8, he made his way once more to the corner of Grosvenor Gardens. A labourer with corduroy trousers tied about the knee and a grimy, spotted blue handkerchief about his neck approached him with unlit pipe and a request for a match. "Red Ike's gone along," he said, as Foyle supplied him. "Nobody else has been hanging round except Freddie. The constable on the beat passed along just after Ike." The match was dropped in the gutter, and the superintendent, his face set grimly, moved slowly on. The labourer crossed to the other side of the road and followed. Foyle was quite near the house when Green walked up, accompanied by his chauffeur, and made quickly up the steps. Shadowy in the fog, the superintendent could see the dim outline of a constable's uniform. The man was peering anxiously at the doorway through which Green had gone. "Well, my man," said Foyle sharply, "are you on duty here? Who are those people who have just gone in there?" The policeman gave a barely perceptible start and then took a pace forward. I believe they have no right there. I must go and see," he said, but was brought up with a jerk as Foyle's hand clutched his wrist. The labourer who had wanted a light was coming across the road at a run and, though a little puzzled, had seized the constable's other hand. "No, you don't," said Foyle peremptorily. "When you masquerade as a policeman again, my friend, make sure you have a letter of the right division on your collar. This district is B, not M. I am a police officer, and I shall arrest you on a charge of being concerned in an attempt at housebreaking. You'd better not make a fuss. Come on, Smithers, let's get him into the car." The prisoner made no resistance. He seemed dazed. Once in the car, the detective took the precaution to handcuff him to his subordinate, right wrist to the officer's left wrist, for he did not know how long the wait for Green might be, and it seemed wisest not to run risks. Detectives rarely handcuff their prisoners unless travelling. It is conspicuous and unnecessary. "Now we're more comfortable," said Foyle, sinking into the cushions of the car. "If you want to give any explanation before I formally charge you, you may. Only don't forget that anything you say may be used in evidence against you." "Is it an offence to go to a fancy dress ball in a police officer's uniform?" asked the prisoner. "Because if it is, I shall plead guilty." "You can make that defence if you like, if you think it will be believed," retorted Foyle. "It will be better for everyone if you tell the truth, though." The man lapsed into a surly, sullen silence, and the superintendent could feel that he was glaring at him in the darkness of the closed car. The other detective looked through the window. "Here comes Mr. Green, sir." Arm in arm and in amicable converse with Ike, the chief detective inspector was approaching the car, with the chauffeur on the other side. Ike, it appeared, had been run to earth in the dining room and had surrendered at discretion. He had all the philosophy of the habitual thief who knows when the game is up. He grinned a little when he saw the handcuffed policeman in the car. "Why, it's you, Mr. Smith. Didn't you think I could be trusted for fair dues over the stuff inside? You've fallen into it this time, and no blooming error. Where's Fred?" "Fred who?" queried Foyle. "Is there someone else in this job?" But Red Ike was too old a bird to be deceived. Instinct as well as reason told him that he had been betrayed, and the absence of Fred but lent fuel to his suspicions. "Ah, don't come it, Mr. Foyle," he said disgustedly, and added a picturesque flow of language, elaborating the steps he would take to get even with Dutch Fred when he had the opportunity. Not one of the detectives interrupted him. The more he talked the better, for he might drop something of value. Not until they drew up at the police station did his eloquence desert him. The superintendent descended first and gave a few instructions, while the soi disant constable was taken to the cells. Ike found himself escorted upstairs into the CID office. Only Heldon Foyle and Green remained with him. "Sit down and make yourself comfortable," said the superintendent cheerfully. "We want to have a little talk with you, Ike. Would you like a drink? Here, have a cigar." Red Ike's swift wits were on the alert. Never before had he known this kind of hospitality to be tendered in a police station to a man arrested red-handed, and although suspicious, he was nevertheless flattered. All criminals, whether at the top or bottom of their profession, are beset by vanity. "A little out of your usual line, this," went on Foyle, watching his man intently. "As neat a job as ever was spoiled by accident. Now, you know as well as I do that we can't force you to talk, but it'll help us a bit if you tell us who you got those keys from, for instance." The office was small and plainly furnished, and Ike stared into the fire as he sipped his whisky, with placid face. That the interview was to be the English equivalent of the third degree, he knew not. There would be no bullying, only coaxing. Foyle was in a position where consummate tact was needed if he was to extract anything from the prisoner. He dared neither threaten nor promise. However helpful Ike might be, he would still have to submit the issue of guilt and punishment to a judge and jury. Ike, unlike Dutch Fred, had no relations, and if he had, it was doubtful if any promise of consideration for them would move him. "It's no good, Mr. Foyle," said Ike. "The only man that was in this with me was Dutch Fred. You'd better go and get him, because I shall tell all about it in court. He gave me the keys." "Don't be a fool, Ike," interposed Green. The prisoner glanced from one to the other with cunning, twinkling eyes. He was too wary to say anything that may be used as evidence. "I guess that it isn't bursting into the place that's put you two to work," he said. "You want to know something? If I could help you, I suppose you'd drop this case?" Heldon Foyle shook his head resolutely. "You know we can't do that in a case of felony. Mr. Green will put in a good word for you at the trial. That's the farthest we can go to." Ike put down his empty glass. He believed he held the whip hand, that he had much to gain and nothing to lose by holding out for better terms. It was a false impression, though a natural one. Heldon Foyle had neither the power nor the inclination to drive a bargain that would permit Ike to go unscathed to renew his depredations on society. "It's no good, governor," said Ike. "If you want me to talk, I'll do it, if you'll let me go." "Right." Foyle rose abruptly. "We'll let it go at that, Ike. You please yourself, of course. Mr. Green, you'd better charge him now." He had passed out of the door, and his footsteps were dying away when Ike awoke to the fact that his attempt at bluff had failed. He raised his voice. "Hi, Mr. Foyle, don't go yet. I'll cough up what I know. Come back." End of chapter 26. Of the Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 27. A grim smile flickered under Chief Inspector Green's grey moustache as Heldon Foyle stepped briskly back into the room and closed the door. Ike met a stare of the superintendent's cold blue eyes squarely. "You've got the bulge on me this time, governor," he admitted ruefully. "I give you best. You're welcome to all I know, though that isn't much." Now that he was near attaining his end, Foyle had to steer a delicate course. The law very rightly insists that there shall be neither threat nor promise held out to any person who is accused of a crime. From the moment a police officer has made up his mind to arrest a man, he must not directly or indirectly induce a person to say anything that might prove his guilt. And a warning of the possible consequences is insisted upon even when a statement is volunteered. Otherwise, admissions or evidence so obtained are ignored, and there is trouble for the police officer who obtained them. That is one of the reasons why detective work in England demands perhaps nicer skill than in most other countries. Green had pulled a fountain pen from his pocket and adjusted a couple of sheets of official foolscap. Foyle remained standing. "Don't let's have any misunderstanding," he said. "We're not making any promises except that the court will know you helped us in another case. If you choose to keep quiet, we can't do a thing to you." "I know all about that," said Ike, with a little shrug of his shoulders. "You know I wouldn't squeal in an ordinary job. I'm no Dutch Freddy to give my pals away. I don't owe the chap anything who put me up to this. What do you want first?" "Tell us all about it your own way. Where did you get the keys of the house?" "Off that chap you raked in along of me. I was sitting in a little game of faro at a joint in the Commercial Road about a week ago, when this tough pulls me out and puts it up to me. I didn't much like it, but the chink who runs the show told me he was straight, and he offered me half—" "You told Freddie you were only getting a third," interposed Green. "Did I?" Ike grinned cunningly. "It must have been a slip of the tongue. Anyway, I said I'd chip in for half or nothing. He powwowed a bit, but at last he gave in. Funny thing about it was he wouldn't hear of keeping an eye open on the day we brought the job off. Said I must get a pal. Yet here he turns up as large as life all the time." The prisoner had hit on a point which had puzzled Foyle for a time, but light had already flashed upon him. In the ordinary course of things, a robbery at Grosvenor Gardens by two known criminal characters would not of necessity be associated with the murder. The third man was taking no chances of being identified as an associate. "Anyway, I took the job on, and he handed me over the twirls and a layout of the house. He didn't tell me who was behind him, and I didn't ask too many questions. He called himself Mr. Smith, and we met once or twice at the —. He named a public house in Leman Street, Whitechapel. That's where I was to have met him tonight with the stuff. Now you know all I know." "Not quite," said Foyle quietly. "What's the address of this gambling joint where you first met him?" Ike shook his head. "Oh, play the game, governor. You aren't going to have that raided after what I've done for you." "We'll see," evaded Foyle. "Where is it?" Reluctantly, Ike gave the address. Green held out a pen to him and pointed to the bottom of the foolscap. "Read that through and sign it if it's all right." The man appended a dashing signature, and with a cheerful "Good night, Mr. Foyle," was ushered by a chief detective inspector down to the charge room. Heldon Foyle rested his elbows on the table and remained in deep thought, immobile as a statue. He roused himself with a start as Green returned. "Both charged," said the other laconically. "The other chap refuses to give any account of himself. Refuses even to give a name. Seems to be a Yankee. I had his fingerprints taken. There was nothing on him to identify him." "Yankee, eh?" repeated Foyle. "So is Grell. There won't be anyone in the fingerprint department at this time of night. We'll go along and have a search by ourselves, I think. If we've not got him there, Pinkerton of the U.S. National Detective Agency is staying at the Cecil. We'll get him to have a look over our man and say whether he recognizes him." "Very good, sir. There's one other thing. When I searched this man I found this. I don't know if you can make anything out of it. I can't." He handed across an envelope already torn open, addressed to "The Advertisement Department, The Daily Wire." Within were two plain sheets of notepaper and a postal order. On one was written, "Dear Sir, please insert the enclosed adverts in the personal column of your next issue. John Jones." On the other were two advertisements. "R.F. You are closely watched. Don't forget 2315. Don't forget 2315. G. E. £27, 14, 5, tomorrow. B." "Very curious," commented Foyle. "Copy them out carefully and have them sent to the paper. They can't do any harm. Now let's get along." The fog hung heavy over a muffled world as they walked down Victoria Street. Green, whose wits were a trifle less supple than those of his chief when imagination was required, put a question. Foyle answered absently. The mysterious advertisements were not altogether mysterious to him. He recalled the cipher that had been found at Grave Street, and decided that there was at least room for hope in that direction. Besides, there was at least one man now in custody who knew something of the mystery, and even if he kept his lips locked indefinitely, there was a probable chance of a new line of inquiry opening when his identity was discovered. And even if fingerprints and Pinkerton failed to resolve that, there was still the resource of the newspapers. With a photograph scattered far and wide, the odds were in favour of someone recognizing its subject. As Foyle switched on the lights in the fingerprint department, Green sat down at a table and with the aid of a magnifying glass carefully scrutinised the prints which he carried on a sheet of paper. Ranged on one side of the room were high filing cabinets divided into pigeonholes numbered from 1 to 1024. In them were contained hundreds of thousands of fingerprints of those known to be criminals. It was for the detectives to find if among them were any identical with those of their prisoner. The whole science of fingerprints for police purposes resolves itself into the problem of classification. It would be an impossible task to compare myriads of records each time. The system employed was absurdly simple to put into execution. In 5 minutes, Green had the fingerprints of the two hands classified into loops and whorls and had made a rough note. WL, WLL, LWW, LW. That done, the remainder was purely a question of arithmetic. Each whorl was given an arbitrary number according to its position. A whorl occurring in the first pair counts 16 in the second, the third 4, the fourth 2, and the fifth 1. Thus Green's efforts became 16, 4, 20 equals 8, 4, 1, 13. The figure 1 was added to both numerator and denominator, and Green at once went to the 14th pigeonhole in a row of the filing cabinet numbered 21. There, if anywhere, he would find the record that he sought. For a while he was busy carefully looking through the collection. "Here it is," he said at last, and read, "Charles J. Condit, American, number 9781, Habitual Convicts Registry." "Put him back," said Foyle. "We'll find his record in the registry." The two detectives, uncertain as to where the regular staff kept the files of the number they wanted, were some little time in searching. It was Foyle who at last reached it from a top shelf and ran his eye over it from the photograph pasted in the top left-hand corner to the meagre details given below. "This is our man right enough," he said. "American fingerprints and photographs supplied by the New York people when he took a trip to this country 5 years ago. Never convicted here. It says little about him. We'll have to cable over to learn what they know." "That gives us a chance for a remand," remarked Green. "Exactly. And in the meantime he may tell us something. A prisoner gets plenty of time for reflection when he's on remand." End of chapter 27. Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 28. 5 minutes after Big Ben had struck 10 o'clock, Heldon Foyle walked into his office to find Sir Ralph Fairfield striding up and down and glancing impatiently at the clock. He made no direct answer to the detective's salutation, but plunged at once into the object of his visit. "Have you seen the Wire this morning?" he asked abruptly. Foyle seated himself at his desk, imperturbable and unmoved. "No," he answered, "but I know of the advertisement that brought you here. As a matter of fact, I sent it to the paper. I should have called on you if you hadn't come. Grell meant it for you right enough." The significance of the detective's admission that he knew of the advertisement did not immediately strike Fairfield. He unfolded a copy of the Daily Wire. "What do you make of the infernal thing?" he demanded. "It's absolute Greek to me." With a letter selected from the pile of correspondence on his desk and opened in his hand, Heldon Foyle swung round and faced his questioner. "It's simply a sighting shot, Sir Ralph," he remarked quietly. "Grell credits you with intelligence enough to remember that number later. Have you any knowledge of ciphers?" "I have an elementary idea that to unravel them you work from the most frequently recurring letter E, isn't it?" "That's right," said Foyle, "but there are other ciphers where that system won't work. Mind you, I don't pose as an expert. If I had a cipher to unravel, I should go to a man who had specialised in them, exactly as I should go to a doctor on a medical question. Still, the advertisement today isn't a cipher. It means exactly what it says." "Thank you," said Fairfield dryly. "I am now as wise as when I started." "Sorry," murmured Foyle suavely. "You'll be wiser presently. The thing isn't complete yet. If you'll excuse me a few minutes, I'll just run through my letters, and then, if you don't mind taking a little walk, we'll go and see Lady Eileen Meredith." Some formal reply rose to Fairfield's lips, he never knew what. The last time he had seen Eileen was fixed in his memory. Then she had practically denounced him as a murderer. Since then she had learnt that every shadow of suspicion had been cleared away from him. How would she receive him if he visited her unexpectedly with Foyle? Why did Foyle wish him to go? Perhaps, after all, there was nothing in it. He told himself fiercely that there was no reason why the meeting should embarrass him. Some day, sooner or later, they would have to meet. Why not now? He was hungry for a sight of her, and yet he was as nervous as a child at the thought of going to her. The slamming of a drawer and the soft click of a key in the lock told that Foyle had finished. He picked up a copy of the Daily Wire and his hat and gloves. "Now, Sir Ralph," he said briskly, and together they descended the narrow flight of stone steps which leads to one of Scotland Yard's back doors. The detective was apparently in a talkative mood, and Fairfield got no chance to ask the questions that were filling his mind. Spite of himself, he became interested in the flow of anecdotes which came from his companion's lips. There were few corners of the world, civilized or uncivilized, where the superintendent had not been in the course of his career. He had the gift of dramatic and humorous story-telling. He spoke of adventures in Buenos Aires, in South Africa, Russia, the United States, and a dozen other countries, of knife thrusts and revolver shots, of sandbagging and bludgeoning, without any suspicion of vaunting himself. The baronet made some comment. "No," said Foyle. "Take it all round, a detective's life is more monotonous than exciting. It's taken me 30 years to collect the experiences I'm telling you about. Things always happen unexpectedly. Some of my narrowest squeaks have taken place in England, in the West End. Why, I was nearly shot in one of the best hotels by an officer sent over from the United States to take charge of a man I had arrested. He was the sheriff of some small town and had a bit of a reputation as a gunman, and had come over with the district attorney to escort the chap back. They did themselves well while they were here waiting to catch a boat back. One morning I strolled into the hotel, and who should run into me but the attorney with a face the colour of white paper. 'That you, Chief?' he gasps. 'For God's sake don't go upstairs. He's on the landing, blazing drunk and with his gun out. He's a dead shot.' Well, I could see that a Wild West sheriff was out of place in a decent hotel, so up I went. He had me covered like a flash, and I yelled out to him not to shoot. 'Hello, Chief,' he says. 'That's all right. Come right up. I won't do a thing. Just wait till I've plugged that cur of an attorney, and we'll go and have a drink.' By this time I was up level with him. I daren't risk trying to get the revolver from him, for he was a quick shot, so I pushed my arm through his. 'I haven't got much time, Sheriff,' says I. 'Let's go and have a drink first, and you settle up with him afterwards.' 'That's a bet,' he says, and I led him down to the bar. I persuaded him to try a new drink of my own invention, its chief component was soda water, and followed it up with strong hot coffee. Meanwhile I managed to get the gun away on the pretext of admiring it. He was reluctant at first, telling me I could have it for keeps after he had finished that cur of an attorney. But I got it, and he was fairly sober by the time I left him. Then there was a sequel. I had warned the sheriff and the attorney, who had made up their differences, that the man they had got was a slippery customer to handle. However, they got him in the boat all right. When they got to New York I had a cable from the captain, a friend of mine. He said the prisoner had not only cleared off the ship by himself, but had carried away the hand baggage of his escort. This reminiscence had brought them to Berkeley Square. Fairfield felt his heart thumping quickly, although his face was impassive as the door was opened in response to Foyle's ring. She might be out. She might refuse to see them. Neither of the two alternatives happened. Within 3 minutes Eileen had descended to them in the drawing-room. She stopped, a graceful figure in black, by the doorway, and gave a barely perceptible start as her eyes rested on the baronet. She bowed coldly. "I did not know you were here, Sir Ralph. I understood Mr. Foyle wished to see me." She was frigid and self-possessed. He had half expected some expression of apology for the wrong she had done him, but she entirely ignored that. But that Fairfield had himself well in hand, he would have openly resented the snub inflicted on him. It was Foyle who answered. "I brought Sir Ralph here. I thought his presence might be necessary." She moved across the room and sank on a couch with a petulant frown. "Well, I suppose you have some disagreeable business to transact. Let us get it over." The superintendent knew that he was dealing with a woman entirely on her guard. Her steady grey eyes were fixed on him closely, as though she could read his thoughts. He thought he could detect a slight twitching of the slender hands that rested idly on her lap. "I want to know," he said slowly, "the meaning of the advertisement addressed to you by Robert Grell in this morning's Daily Wire." He could have sworn that his shot had hit, that she flinched a little as he spoke, but if so she showed no further sign. Instead, her face was all astonishment as she replied, "I don't quite understand. What advertisement? I know nothing about Mr. Grell since he left Grosvenor Gardens. Will you explain?" Deliberately the superintendent took from his breast pocket a copy of the Daily Wire, folded back at the personal column, and read, "E. £27, 14/5. Tomorrow. B." "That," he said, "is addressed to you. It is hardly worth while denying knowledge of it. It was found last night on a man arrested for attempted housebreaking at Mr. Grell's house. I ordered that it be sent to the paper, together with another intended for the eye of Sir Ralph Fairfield." Her interest was plainly awakened. "Then the other was for you," she cried, turning to Fairfield. "I wondered if—" She paused with the realization that she had admitted what she had a moment before denied. Foyle's foot pressed heavily on the toe of the baronet to warn him not to speak. "Yes, it was for Sir Ralph," he said. "That is why I brought him here. It is you, though, who hold the key to this mystery. We know that you would have sent your jewels to Grell, that you are in communication with his friends. You are young, Lady Eileen, and don't realize that you are playing with fire." Your silence can do your lover no good. It may do him and yourself harm. You have been visited by the Princess Petrovska, an adventuress not fit to touch the hem of your skirt. You are already involved. Take the advice of a man old enough to be your father, and confide in us." She had risen, and her slim form towered over the seated detective. She seemed about to resent his words, but suddenly burst into a ripple of laughter. "You would be offensive if you were not amusing, Mr. Foyle. Don't you think my help would be a little superfluous, since you know so much?" she asked with a quietness that robbed the remark of some of its bitterness. "I think you had better go now." "I am sorry," said Foyle. "You may regret that you did not take my advice." She herself held the door open for them to pass out. To the surprise of Fairfield, she held out her hand to him while ignoring the detective. "Come back alone as soon as you can," she whispered. "I want to speak to you." Foyle had apparently neither heeded nor heard. Yet, as soon as they were out of eyeshot of the house, he turned to Fairfield. "She asked you to go back." "Eh?" The baronet was startled. "Yes, how did you know? Did you overhear her?" "No, but I hoped she would when I took you there. That was the whole reason of our visit. I didn't expect to get her to say or admit anything." Fairfield came to an abrupt halt, and gripped his companion by the arm. "You intended— For what reason? How could you know?" "Absolute common sense, my dear sir, that's all. Absolute common sense. If you are a chess player, you know that the man who can foretell what move his opponent is going to make usually wins. Here, let's find a quiet Piccadilly tea shop, and I'll tell you all about it." There is no place which one may find more convenient for a quiet conversation than the London tea shop before 12 in the morning. Over a cup of coffee in the deserted smoking room, Foyle spoke to the point. "I did not tell you why I took you to see Lady Eileen, because I was afraid you might refuse. She has been antagonistic to you hitherto. The fact that Grell advertised you in somewhat the same manner as herself has given her the idea that, after all, you too might be trying to shield him. Naturally, she wants to be certain, in order that you may join forces. That's why I prevented you saying anything. Now, if you go back to her, you may tell her that I practically forced you to accompany me. You can win her confidence, and through her we may get on the right track." An angry flush mounted to Fairfield's temples. "In short," he said curtly, "you want me to act as a spy on an unsuspecting girl. No thanks, that's not in our bargain." He was genuinely angry at the proposal. The superintendent saw that he had been too blunt, and made haste to repair his error. "Don't be in a hurry," he protested. "The girl, as I told her, is beginning to be mixed up in a dangerous business. This is the only way to extricate her. You may help her and Grell and us by doing as I ask. Consider it coolly, and you will see it is the best thing to do." Sir Ralph set down his cup and fingered his watch chain. Foyle signalled the waitress, paid the bill, lit a cigar, and waited. "I'll have to think it over," said Fairfield thoughtfully. "Give me an hour or two." "Right you are," agreed the detective heartily, and they made their way out into the street. End of chapter 28. Of the Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 29. It was with mixed feelings that Fairfield yielded at last to Foyle's arguments and returned to see Eileen Meredith. To his consent he had attached the condition that he was to be allowed to use his own judgment as to how much of the interview he should communicate to the detective, and with this Foyle had to be content. The baronet found the girl waiting for him, her face alight with eagerness. She was in her own boudoir, luxuriously ensconced in a big armchair, and she smiled brightly at him, such a smile as he had not seen since before the murder. He obeyed her invitation to sit down. "You wanted to see me alone," he said. She nodded. "Yes, I want to know if we are allies or enemies. I know I have treated you abominably, but I was driven half mad by the thought that Bob was dead. Now we are working together, are we not?" He made a little gesture with his hands, helplessly as one at a loss. "In so far as we both wish to get Grell out of his difficulty, and I wish I knew what that was, yes," he replied. "I don't believe him to be a murderer, but why does he remain in hiding? He is not the sort of man to do foolish things, and that is foolish on the face of it. He has some strong reason for being out of the way. Can you explain?" She pulled her chair closer to him and laid one slim hand on his. "I cannot explain. I can only trust. He looked to us to help him. I know that he wants money, for he sent a friend to tell me. I had none, but I gave her my jewels. Detectives were watching her, and they, with the connivance of my father, took them from her. Now you, his most intimate friend, must help him. He has given you the key to the cipher which will appear, and then I suppose he will tell you how to get it to him." She had apparently taken it for granted that the baronet was with her, in whole-souled devotion to her lover. His fingers beat a tattoo on his knee. "So that advertisement was the key to a cipher. Do you know when I shall get a message?" I shall get one tomorrow. You? Who knows? Then you can tell me how to read it." She hesitated a moment, finger on chin. Then, animated by a quick resolve, she moved to a little inlaid desk and unlocked a drawer. She returned with a piece of paper in her hand. "What was the number mentioned in your advertisement?" 2315. For a little the only sound in the room was the scratching of pencil on paper. At last she finished and handed the result to him. He wrinkled his brows as he studied it. "This is the key, 2315 23 152 315. VKJX KV UMG NFD." "The bottom line is the top one turned into cipher," she explained. "The middle line is the key number. In the first word you take the second letter from T, the third from H, the first from I, and so on. It is a cipher that cannot be unravelled without the key number. H becomes K once and M once." "I see." The simplicity of it at once dawned on him. That was what Foyle meant when he said that some ciphers could not be solved by the recurring E, he said unthinkingly. She had risen and flung away from him in quick revulsion. One glance at her face told him what he had done. "You spy!" There was stinging scorn in her tone. "You have talked it over with Foyle, and that man knows all. You are here to worm out what I know in order to betray your friend. Oh, don't trouble to lie," as he would have spoken. "I can see your object, and I nearly fell into the trap." The man was not without dignity, as he stood a little white but steady. "You may call me what you like," he said in a low voice. "Spy if you will. Believe me or not, I have acted for the best, for you and for Grell. You once called me a murderer. With what justification you now know. Are you so ready to judge hastily again?" If he had hoped to move her from her gust of passion, he quickly learned his mistake. Her lips curled in contempt, and drawing her skirts aside as she passed him as though a touch might contaminate her, she swept to the doorway. For one instant she stood posed. "You call yourself a spy. It is a good name. For a police spy there is no room in this house." With that she was gone. The man had flushed under the biting contempt in her voice and words, and now stood for a little with hands tightly clenched, gazing after her. He felt that, from her point of view at least, there was some truth in her words. He was, whatever his motives, a police spy, and yet he was but concerned to clear up the horrible tangle in which his friend and the girl had become involved. He did not know that he was watched from behind the curtains as he walked blindly into the street. Eileen, with lips firmly set and face tense, was concealed behind curtains. No sooner had he gone than she hurriedly dressed herself and ordered an electric brougham. She had come to believe that her lover's safety depended on her actions that day. Foyle knew the secret of the cipher, and Grell's advertisement told her that he intended communicating something to her by that method the next day. At all costs she must prevent him betraying himself. Only one course occurred to her. She must go to the office of the Daily Wire and prevent his advertisement from appearing. How she was to do it she had not the slightest idea. That she left for later reflection. The car rolled smoothly towards Fleet Street, but no inspiration came to her. She alighted at the advertisement office with its plate glass and gilded letters, and was attended by an obsequious clerk. Outwardly calm, but with her heart beating quickly beneath her furs, she put her inquiry to a sleek-haired clerk. He was polite but firm. It was quite possible that such an advertisement as she mentioned had been sent for insertion the following day, and again it might not. In any case he was forbidden to give any information. It would be quite out of the question to stop any advertisement unless she held the receipt. "But if the advertisement has not already been given in, can you give a note to whoever brings it?" she asked in a flash of inspiration. Yes, that could be done. She tore off her glove and with slim nervous fingers wrote hurriedly. The sleek clerk supplied her with an envelope, and as she placed her message in it and handed it to him, she felt it was a forlorn hope. There was only one other way of outwitting the detectives. Should Grell give any address in his message, she must reach him early in the morning before the police could act. A couple of questions elicited the fact that the paper would be on sale by 4 the next morning. That would mean another journey to Fleet Street, for the ordinary newsagent's shop would not be open at that time. The brougham turned about and began the homeward journey. A respectably dressed working man, who had apparently been absorbed in a page of advertisements of situations vacant displayed on a slab in the window, slouched into the office, and a man bareheaded and wearing a frock-coat moved briskly forward, apparently to attend to him. Yet it was more than coincidence that they met at a deserted end of the counter. "That was Lady Eileen Meredith," said the workman in a quick, low voice. "What did she want?" "She's guessed that we know the cipher," retorted the other. "She gave a letter to be handed over to whoever brings the advertisement. Here is what she says." He pulled the letter which Eileen had written 5 minutes before from its envelope. "The police know the cipher. Be very cautious. R.F. is acting with them. I'll telephone to Mr. Foyle at once. You had better stay outside." The second man went back to the pavement and resumed his study of the advertisement board, but a close observer might have seen that his eyes wandered past it now and again to the persons inside the office. Half an hour went by. Then the frock-coated man inside took a silk hat from a peg and placed it on his head. Simultaneously a woman went out. A dozen paces behind her went the workman, and a dozen paces behind him the frock-coated man. Heldon Foyle had selected his subordinates well for their work. Acting on the policy of leaving nothing to chance, he had taken a hint from the advertisement addressed to Eileen and had the office watched from the time it opened. It was simple to get the manager's permission to place one man within and to get him to direct the clerks to pass through his hands all cipher advertisements for the personal column. If the advertisement came through the post, their time would be thrown away. If it was delivered by hand, there was a chance of learning whence it had been dispatched. The intervention of Lady Eileen was an accident that could not have been foreseen. In that matter, luck had played into Foyle's hands. End of chapter 29. Of the Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blachford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froest. Chapter 30. Between Berkeley Square and Scotland Yard, Fairfield consumed 10 cigarettes in sharp, jerky puffs. Yet he was scarcely conscious of lighting one. Indeed, as he climbed the wide flight of steps at the main entrance, it seemed as though no palpable interval of time had elapsed since he had been practically turned out of her father's house by Eileen Meredith. Heldon Foyle put away the bundle of documents that contained the history of the case as the baronet was announced, and waved his visitor to a chair. "Well?" he asked. Fairfield shrugged his shoulders. "A nice mess you've got me into," he complained. "Why didn't you tell me you knew the secret of the cipher?" The detective's face was full of ingenuous surprise as he answered, "Didn't I? I thought I made it perfectly clear to you. I am sorry that you misunderstood. I should have made it plainer. What has gone wrong?" Sir Ralph made an impatient gesture. "Oh, what's the use of talking nonsense? You did not tell me that you knew the cipher, and as a consequence Lady Eileen now knows that you know." The superintendent gave no indication of the chagrin with which the news filled him. His features were perfectly expressionless. A part of his plans had failed from excess of caution. He did not need Fairfield to tell him what had happened. He could make a fairly accurate guess as to the manner in which he had been unwittingly betrayed. His thoughts turned at once to the question of what the girl would do. If he had judged her right, she would try to warn Grell. Either she knew his address or not, but it was unlikely that she did, as they were communicating in cipher. The obvious thing for her to do was to try to stop the advertisement. There was, however, little he could do. He had men on duty in Berkeley Square and in Fleet Street. He would soon hear of any new developments. "That's a pity," he said reflectively. "It may mean a rearrangement of our plans. And believe me, Sir Ralph, I badly regret now that I did not go into fuller details with you. What happened?" Stumblingly, Sir Ralph recapitulated the scene at Berkeley Square, giving even the epithets by which the girl had addressed him. Foyle tapped lightly on his desk with the end of a penholder. The event had been as he thought. He looked Sir Ralph straight in the eye. "She told you that you were a spy, that I had used you as a tool," he said sharply. "You have been hurt by her words. I don't want you to feel that you are anything but a free agent, or to do anything that you consider dishonourable. But I must know whether you are still willing to act with us, or whether you wish to stand aside." Fairfield threw the stump of cigarette viciously into the fire. "I am acting with you, of course," he answered sullenly, "though I wish you to ask for my help only when it is absolutely necessary. What I complain of is that I have not been frankly treated, and that I have been placed in an invidious position with Lady Eileen. You must remember that I have feelings, and that it is not pleasant to be told one is acting as a spy, especially by an old friend. You know, Mr. Foyle, that I have only been wishful to serve those I have known." There was something pathetic in his endeavour to justify his actions to himself. Foyle murmured a sympathetic, "I understand. Yes, I know," and then became thoughtful. "After all," he said at last, "this does not make us so very badly off. You are openly on our side now, Sir Ralph, so there can be no fear of your again being accused of acting in an underhand manner. There is nothing more to be done at the moment. I will keep you posted as to any steps we are taking." "Very well. Good morning, Mr. Foyle." The baronet was gone. The superintendent resumed his perusal of documents. He felt some little compunction at what had happened, yet it was his business to clear up the mystery and to use what instruments came to his hand, so long as the law was not violated. There is a code of etiquette in detective work in which the first and most important rule is, take advantage of every chance of bringing a criminal to justice. In using Fairfield as an instrument, Foyle was merely following that code. In a little, Foyle had finished and sent for Green. The chief inspector came with a report. "A woman brought the advertisement to Fleet Street, sir," he said. "Blake has just telephoned up that he and Lambert are keeping her under observation. He phoned earlier that Lady Eileen Meredith had been there." "Yes, I suppose so. What does the advertisement say?" "He couldn't tell me on the phone. He had to hurry away to look after the woman. It is being sent up by taxicab." "That's good. By the way, Green, keep half a dozen men handy, and be about yourself." "Very good, sir. Is there anything on?" "I don't quite know. We may have to go out in a hurry. I'll tell you after we have deciphered the advertisement." End of chapter 30.